Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and begin, if you wouldn't mind wrapping up your conversations. Welcome. It's nice to see everyone. This is Board Chair Katie Crystal speaking for those listening or following along by television. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Vice Chairman Dorsey, Mr. Carantonis, Mr. DeFerranti, and we know Ms. Garvey will be stepping out to join us shortly. Thank you for those of you who have joined us here in the county boardroom, and thank you to those who are joining remotely via Microsoft Teams or watching on their televisions. A few announcements. A note that masks are optional. Board members and senior staff are going to continue practicing our social distancing, and others may wear masks with this level of attendance. I know social distancing is hard, so mask wearing is welcome, though optional. You will find as well that some members of the public, as well as county staff and other presenters, are participating remotely as part of our hybrid meeting model, which is here to stay to facilitate participation. And so just a few words, if you are speaking at public comment or if you are here for our agenda item later today, for in-person speakers, that podium can be adjusted up or down using those arrow buttons on your right-hand side. Please do speak clearly into the microphone. That helps not only us help you, but the recording help and for the broadcast. If you are submitting documents as part of the testimony, please hand them to the clerk with your name and contact information on them. If you are speaking remotely, please do keep your microphones muted until you are called upon to speak, and your cameras off as well. That helps us manage the bandwidth. You need to unmute yourself if you've called in. *6 is the way to do that when it's your time to speak, or clicking the microphone button if you're using Teams. A Spanish language interpreter is available for this part of the meeting, at least public comment. Buenos días, if you could introduce yourself in Spanish English.
Good morning, my name is Cynthia Lopez Roman, Spanish interpreter.
Excellent.
Good morning, my name is Laura Castro, Spanish interpreter. Laura Castro, intérprete de español.
Muchas gracias. We're glad to have you with us this morning. Occasionally, you might see board members get up and stretch our legs, but please know there are speakers and monitors in the back, so we can still hear you and the meeting. All right. One more thing before we launch into public comment. We have definitely had a lot of discussion this year about the purpose of public comment. A reminder, we have long had this tradition as a way to inform and alert the board to issues that are not subject to recent public hearings or upcoming public hearings, to ensure that we can hear a range of topics and to be fair and consistent across those speaking on different issues. We have a one speaker per topic rule that helps us get to the main meeting and to hear your neighbors who have come to speak on the advertised item. We really appreciate everybody's help in keeping things respectful and fair to your fellow residents. If you are here with a coordinated group today, and it appears there are, you are welcome to signal your support for the comments of the speaker who is voicing your opinions. Feel free to stand, hold signs as you're already doing, etc. If we can keep the noise to a minimum, that helps keep us moving expeditiously as well. We, with that, I think are ready for our public comment period. So I'm going to turn to our clerk, Ms. Jacobs, if you could first call the first two public comment speakers, please.
Our first speaker is Susan English, followed by Jennifer Owens.
Good morning, Ms. English. You're on when the red light is on, so hit it one more time. And if you could just hit the base of it so the red light comes on, that way the microphone will be on. The base of the microphone. Yeah. Oh. There we go. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. We who live in single-family homes are privileged. We should acknowledge that. Our comfortable lifestyle is highly subsidized by renters as well as companies, so we should be willing to share our nice neighborhoods with a few more families. Ordinary people with partners, jobs, and sometimes children. They're a social and economic benefit, not a burden. They contribute to our tax base and provide more customers for our restaurants, small businesses, and services. But those nice neighborhoods we love also depend on essential workers of all kinds. Teachers and daycare help our children. Police keep us safer. Nurses and therapists care for us. Librarians, mechanics, and maintenance workers make our lives livable. Expecting those workers to live in Clinton, Stafford, Woodbridge, or Herndon is burdening our environment and their lives. We owe it to our larger community to let more people live here. Through smaller multiplexes, yes, but especially through denser, affordable apartment housing. Doing otherwise is environmentally unsustainable and it's exclusionary. I've lived in a pleasant teardown in a nice neighborhood for 40 years, but I hope when I leave, my house will be replaced with at least a duplex. I urge the board to avoid delay and to support the missing middle proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. English.
Our next speaker is Jennifer Owens, followed by Audrey Clement.
Ms.
Good
Owens,
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Katie? Good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jennifer Owens, and though I'm the president and CEO of Arlington Community Foundation, I'm here today on behalf of the nearly 24 organizations who have signed on to a call to action for preservation of deeply affordable housing in the historic redevelopment of Barcroft Apartments. I've sent you a copy of the call to action, and I see it there on the screen today. We commend you for making the commitment to preserve 1,334 units at 60% AMI for 99 years, and for your commitment to not displace any current tenants. This is a considerable accomplishment for the county and its partners, and is a critical and necessary first step to preserving Barcroft's affordability. This is not missing middle. This is about preserving deeply affordable housing for our lowest income neighbors. For decades, the Barcroft Apartments have provided housing affordable to residents with a diverse array of incomes and backgrounds, including Arlington's lowest income households. In a recently conducted census of the property, nearly 78% of current residents reported income 60% and below. 25% of current residents are living on just 30% or less of our area median income. The redevelopment of Barcroft is one of the most amazing opportunities to achieve a scaled solution to 30% housing. If done thoughtfully and creatively, it could create a roadmap for future progress on this tough-to-reach affordability. To that end, when finalized, we ask that the Barcroft Master Financing and Development Plan include explicit commitments to producing 255 units of hardwired housing at 30% AMI for at least 30 years, and employing a financing strategy that uses tools and funding sources that avoid displacing current tenants or occupancy by future tenants with similar challenges. We know that this is not going to be easy, and we stand ready to assist in this important work. And I thank you again for the opportunity to present this call to action to you today.
Thank you, Ms. Owens.
Our next speaker is Audrey Clement, followed by Wells Harrell.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Audrey Clement, independent candidate for County Board, Slide 1. As the only County Board candidate opposed to missing middle upzoning, I want to debunk some myths about it. Myth number 1, missing middle will redress racial inequities by providing affordable housing. Not so. According to the county's own data, a household must earn at least $108,000 a year to qualify for the smallest one-bedroom unit in an 8-plex. Black and Latino median household income is a fraction of that. Myth 2, Slide 2. Missing middle will provide more home buying opportunities for people who can't afford it. Not so. The county projects that about 90% of new units will be 1 to 2 bedrooms only in good supply. In fact, the plan will cause a net loss in needed 3-bedroom units. Also, the data suggest 80% will be rentals, not owner-occupied. Myth 3, Slide 3. Only 20 lots a year will be missing middle, so the impacts will be negligible. Doubtful. The county has refused to show the math behind this number, but the impacts of missing middle on schools, parking, traffic, runoff, and tree canopy could be enormous. The flipping of properties by out-of-state investors will inflate land values and real estate assessments, displacing moderate-income residents and leaving the rest with a huge tax burden. Myth 4, Slide 4. Tree canopy of 20 to 50% is achievable. Not so. According to the Arlington Tree Action Group, the tree canopy replacement requirement will be slashed in half, potentially impacting 60% of Arlington's tree canopy. Implementation of only 20% of the plan would remove trees from an area the size of 9 Pentagon parking lots. Alternatives to missing middle upzoning include community land trusts, commercial...
Thank you, Ms. Clement.
Thank you, Dr. Clement.
Our next speaker is Wells Harrell, followed by Aaron Nigel.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue to hear from neighbors. Mr. Harrell, please.
Madam Chair, Mr. Schwartz, members of the board, my name is Wells Harrell. I'm a homeowner in Arlington East Falls Church, and I'm here today to encourage the staff and the board to make Plan Langston Boulevard even more ambitious in two key respects in order to accomplish the goals that the county board has already set. The first is about the number of affordable homes. Right now, the preliminary concept plan simply doesn't allow for the creation of enough homes to meet the county's own goal for affordable housing in the 2015 Affordable Housing Master Plan. The culprit here, most likely, is the heights are too low. More height means more homes, which is not just good for the people who can live there and join our communities, but also, as Susan mentioned, provides more customers for many of our local businesses. The second is on the inclusion of the East Falls Church and Cherrydale areas in the specific recommendations to be adopted. Now, these are areas where, especially in East Falls Church's case, and I can attest to this, the county has come nowhere close to realizing the visions that it's set forth in those plans. Metro today remains surrounded by parking lots at the East Falls Church station. And so far, there's only been one residential development since the plan was adopted in 2011. Now, I supported that development. That was the very first time I addressed the board back in 2017, but we need to do more. We need to take stock of why we haven't achieved the goals set forth in the Cherrydale and East Falls Church area plans and make those recommendations a specific part of the final Plan Langston Boulevard in order to not just learn from the lessons that we had there, but to guide us going forward and make sure that we achieve the visions that we have for Langston Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell.
Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Aaron Nagel, followed by Kit Norland.
Reverend Dr. Nagel.
Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Thank you. I would like to inform the county board that I have decided to rename what I drive. I'm going to call it a relocation device and not an automobile, and therefore I will not be suspect to the personal property tax in the future. That sounds ludicrous, though that's exactly what the county has intended to do when it is notifying nonprofits that it's going to change the name from stormwater tax to stormwater fee. The county notified all of us by email on Monday. It stated for the sole purpose to increase revenue. I find it disconcerting that the county leadership would try to attack the tax-exempt status of nonprofits that feed the homeless, clothe the needy and the less fortunate, support shelters and battered women, help fund medical clinics, and provide an array of assistance services. I realize that the courts across the country have allowed this loophole, and many jurisdictions have taken it up. Thank you, Idaho, for seeing clearly. Tax exempt used to mean tax exempt. It's not supposed to mean let's just call the tax by another name. Lest people don't think this is important, under this logic, the county could state that property taxes are now property fees and remove the tax exempt status of churches and synagogues and the Goodwill and the Salvation Army on the land that they own. Board members, just because you have the jurisdiction to have a crafty way for a loophole, I encourage you not to take it. Tax exempt means tax exempt. However, if you do, please know that I publicly notified you that I'm renaming my vehicle a relocation device. Arlington is only 26 square miles, has a budget of $1.4 billion, is the 6th wealthiest county in the nation. Do you really need to raid the finances of nonprofits? A rose by any other name is still a rose.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kit Norland, followed by Griffin Crouch.
Good morning, Ms. Norland.
Good morning, Chair Crystal, Vice Chair Dorsey, members of the board. President Biden's administration recently embraced bold action to combat climate change. The Inflation Reduction Act, called the most aggressive action taken to confront the climate crisis makes a colossal commitment to reduce the ghastly impacts of global warming. NOAA reports this summer was Earth's 5th warmest on record. The 5 warmest June-August periods on record have occurred since 2015. Around the U.S. and the world, global warming is intensifying. Flash flooding is causing high numbers of deaths. Ice caps are melting at unprecedented rates. Sea level rise is accelerating. It's only fair as the crisis intensifies and we see the federal government take bold action for residents to ask, how is Arlington responding? What actions are we taking? To Arlington's credit, there's a budget to hire a climate officer. And this step is mostly a token unless immediately reinforced with actions in line with the seriousness demonstrated by the federal government. Arlingtonians have a right to know, for example, what budget and staffing will the climate officer control? How will climate priorities be integrated throughout government departments? How are you, the board, prioritizing climate in decisions you make each and every day? For example, as you assess and vote on projects that fast-track paving and building across the county, how are you working to ensure the county doesn't become one vast urban heat island? Congressman Beyer, among many other leaders, calls global warming the existential threat of our time. In the face of this crisis, business as usual would be unconscionable. I hope your actions and decisions will demonstrate that you fully agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Merlin.
Next speaker is Griffin Crouch, followed by Dima Hikura.
Good morning. Do I press this to begin? Or?
No, we're good. Good morning, Mr. Crouch.
Good morning. I'm Griffin Crouch, a scout in Troop 167. We're a group of over 50 boys and girls, and we have met at Mount Olivet Methodist Church on Glebe Road for 70 years. Last year, the National Methodist Church told their churches to stop officially sponsoring scout troops, but that they could still let the scouts meet there. So we formed a nonprofit to be the sponsor of the troop. That has been going really well so far, but recently we found out it means we'll have to start paying $3,000 a year in taxes on the troop's vans. Because the BSA requires the troop sponsoring organization to hold title to the troop's property in trust for the troop, the vans are now held by a non-religious nonprofit and don't have that religious tax exemption anymore. These vans take scouts on campouts and hikes, and to once-in-a-lifetime adventures, backpacking in New Mexico and scuba diving in Florida. They also bring scouts to meetings because not all scouts' families can afford to drive them. And early in the pandemic, we ran a food drive that helped nutrition-insecure families that relied on use of the vans. $3,000 is a big bite out of our $21,000 budget. It seems wrong that a scout troop has to pay that because of being sponsored by a non-religious nonprofit rather than a church. We still help the church, and it considers us part of its social justice ministries. A lot of members are first-generation immigrants. The vans help us ensure that every scout gets to participate in practicing leadership and serving the community and have fun doing it, regardless of their family's income. I hope that the county can find a way for the troop to remain tax-exempt, like Arlington's other scout troops and youth organizations. And I hope that there's a way to resolve this before it has to be paid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crouch.
Next speaker is Dima Hikura, followed by Scott Pedowitz.
Good morning. I'm Dima Hakura. I'm not here to criticize, but to inspire. I'm not talking about one initiative or one development, but all. Arlington holds one of the most educated and forward-thinking populations in the country. We need a leadership that builds consensus among us and unites us, a leadership that not only respects our opinions and values them, but also taps into them, one that considers our thoughts and makes constructive use of them to evolve the solutions possible. With a collaborative approach, you may not get the results you had worked for at the beginning of a process. You get far superior ones that meet your citizens' needs. Interestingly, Arlington was always known for that. But somehow, somewhere, we lost our way, and we need to find it again. In contrast, we, your citizens, are ready and willing to work with you to achieve the best results. In contrast, we do not need a leadership that only listens to those who support their agenda and ignores the rest and only creates division in our society. We do not need people to patronize us and tell us that they're making the tough decisions because they know better. For the past 10 years, I have been coaching elementary students on creative, out-of-the-box thinking and teamwork. Any of my students can tell you that when we put our minds together and build upon each other's ideas, we come out with far superior results. I repeat, it starts at the top. Leadership act as a model for the rest of the county, for their advisors, commissioners, committees, and staff. When I told people I was coming to speak before you today, the reaction was, why bother? Or it's not going to make an iota of difference, or their mind is already made up. They have an agenda that they want to push regardless. I am hoping differently. Citizens and their associations need to be invited back and to have a weighted seat on the table. Things cannot be rammed on them anymore. Public engagement needs to be real, not a check-the-box attitude that we have all become familiar with. Surveys must solicit opinions, not limit them. And every citizen in this county needs to be respected and listened to. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker is Scott Pedowitz. Scott Pedowitz, followed by Adam Theo.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Scott Pedowitz. I am a volunteer on the board of directors of the Clarendon Alliance, and I am here this morning with an invitation for you, for everybody in the room, for everybody watching on TV and YouTube and Teams, and that is to join us a week from today, Saturday the 24th, for Clarendon Day, back for the first time in 3 years. So, yes, we will be out there from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. over by the Clarendon Metro Plaza and the streets around it. We have great attractions, live music from Captain Seawalker's Yacht Rock Party, starting early, and Uncle Jesse. Yes, those are all band names. Craft beer, wine, food from local restaurants, artists and exhibitors, really great creative stuff there. A fun kids zone for our youngest Arlingtonians, and people like me who are young at heart can, enjoy a little bit as well. There is more information on our website, clarendon.org. Additionally, we are seeking volunteers. So if you want to get involved in, if you want to come and patronize and enjoy, do that. If you want to contribute as well, there are opportunities to be outside and to do that. You can sign up at Volunteer Arlington, which is volunteer.leadercenter.org. Click Learn More under Volunteers, and then Volunteer Opportunities will be right at the top. If that's a bit of a mouthful, you can send an email to clarendonday@clarendon.org, and we'll get you that information. I brought my volunteer t-shirt from Clarendon Day 19, and I look forward to seeing all y'all out there wearing its 2022 equivalent a week from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pedowitz.
Our final speaker is Adam Theo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam Theo, independent candidate for Arlington County Board, and I'm not here to talk about missing middle housing. I'm here to talk about something even more important than missing middle housing, and that is using ranked choice voting to rebuild our Arlington way. Rebuilding the Arlington way with ranked choice voting is a voting system for elections that allows voters to rank their preferred candidate from favorite to second favorite to third favorite and so on. Then some math stuff happens, and it's calculated which candidate has the strongest and widest support from the voters. Elections using ranked choice voting are far more accurate of the people's will and preferences by getting rid of the spoiler vote. You see, in any truly competitive election with more than two candidates, there's always the anxiety of casting a vote for your favorite preferred candidate, the one you really want, versus the candidate you think can win to beat the other person. The downside is that ranked choice voting is a little more complicated and requires a little bit more time and effort from us, the voters. But the reward is tremendous. Ranked choice voting is probably the single best way to rebuild our Arlington way by making sure every resident has a voice and no vote is wasted. Ranked choice voting has been available to be used since 2020, 1 year earlier than the rest of the Commonwealth, thanks to the efforts of Delegate Patrick Hope and others. But Arlington squandered that opportunity and is still delaying planning and implementation of ranked choice voting. Each and every one of you up on the dais has a sacred responsibility to all voters, not just your political party. Do not let partisanship and complacency destroy this great opportunity to strengthen trust in our local government and rebuild the Arlington way. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Theo.
That's our final speaker.
All right. As is our custom, just a couple of words in response to those who've joined us today. I think in most cases we have some good ongoing opportunities to talk about these issues, but for those who've taken the time, just a couple of words I'll go through, and then if colleagues have anything to add. Ms. English and Dr. Clement, thank you both for coming in, and thank you to many who have joined us today. I'm going to speak just a few words about the missing middle process for engagement and ways to participate in this conversation. So over the next few weeks, we are talking to 700 Arlingtonians in small group conversations, community conversations. We have kept adding sessions until everyone who wanted a spot moved off the wait list could be moved onto a conversation, and we're really looking forward to those. Some have happened already, and I know my colleagues are joining as well. If you didn't have a chance to register or get on a wait list and now off a wait list, we do still want to continue the conversation. We will be dedicating parts of our Open Door Mondays through probably the end of the year, at least November, to continuing those conversations in a small, more dynamic environment as well. We are also 1/3 of the way through information sessions that we're hosting. There's a strong desire within the community to hear from independent experts, to kick the tires on ideas about the cost and economics of housing in Arlington, as well as things like comprehensive planning and whether Arlington is prepared to address impacts on everything from tree canopy to public facilities like schools or public safety. We had a great kickoff to those. That video is now available on the website featuring independent economists. We also have sessions upcoming on the history and future of zoning, and again, comprehensive planning. So we encourage everyone to visit arlingtonva.us, search Missing Middle. You'll find some ways to engage there, and we look forward to engaging in a more dynamic conversation. I also just want to give a sincere thanks to all who've come for respecting our one speaker per topic rule and helping us hear from more neighbors. Ms. Owens, we so appreciate your coming in today. I think I speak for all of us on the board and our staff when I say we are really grateful for the Community Foundation's leadership. This necessity of following through on our commitment to zero displacement at Barcroft Apartments is, I think, one of the most important housing strategies consuming stakeholders like yourself and many other groups in Arlington, certainly our staff and the new mission-driven owner of that property. And so the Community Foundation in particular has done, I think, really commendable work that you presented with us today, or presented us with today, to achieve, as you put it, hardwired units committed to 30% of area median income, or committed to affordable at 30% of area median income as part of the long-run vision. I know our staff, I know the board are really interested in this as well. Right now that is in a financial analysis stage and is absolutely, we're including a look at the Community Foundation's recommendations. So income averaging and financing subsidies, land use tools, things that we've never done in Arlington before because of the magnitude of this need and opportunity. So we're really looking forward to working with you, and we appreciate the constructiveness of you and the many signatories to that call to action. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to say, when we talk about committed to 30% AMI, that is the long-term future of Barcroft. Short-term, there is absolute commitment to zero displacement at Barcroft. We cannot say that enough. I know there's a lot of misinformation in the community, and we want every resident of Barcroft to know the county is working really hard. The owner of Barcroft is working really hard to know that rents are not increasing at all in 2022. Starting next year, they may increase by a maximum of 3% annually, which at this point is pretty sub-inflation. And for any household for whom even that 3% is the difference between their ability to stay in Barcroft, including if they are already struggling to afford their rent in Barcroft. We have a lot of tools available. I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of phone numbers just in case we can reach everyone today. We have there is a resident resource coordinator on site, 703-368-8888. To help, as well as the Arlington Department of Human Services team, which we can help with food assistance, rent assistance, and anything else you might need. Assistance is available irrespective of the immigration status of your household. Please call 703-228-1300 if you need any help. It's so important to all of us that our neighbors of the Barcroft property can stay for the long term and be part of that future vision. All right, Mr. Harrell, thank you for coming in to talk about Plan Langston Boulevard, particularly your comments with regard to expansion of the scope of the plan. There again, I'll note just some processes to engage. I think some in our community may have seen, and you're referring to the preliminary concept plan that was made available just last month. There are a lot of opportunities to share perspectives on that. We have a new feedback form just launched. The Langston Blvd Alliance is hosting a design studio for residents to get in and really understand the way some of these proposals might play out. We are doing virtual community meetings. There's an interactive map that I have found a really educational tool for understanding what this might look like in real life. So we really appreciate being able to continue that conversation. Mr. Harrell, thanks for bringing it up. Reverend Dr. Nagel, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about our stormwater fee, which is now going into effect. We have been engaged in a conversation, and I see some signs about it, about stormwater management in Arlington over the past couple of years. We have a plan called Flood Resilient Arlington to address the legacy of largely single-family planning decisions in the middle of last century that are now leading to flooding throughout our community. That requires a lot of investment. You can see in our CIP on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. When it comes to figuring out how to pay for these investments, the structure that this board has given staff guidance to adopt and that they're following through on is paying for it by assessing fees on the basis of how much runoff is generated by properties. Historically, we have asked everyone to pay equally when everyone is not contributing to the impacts of stormwater equally. And so just wanted to emphasize that stormwater fee is paying for stormwater infrastructure. It is not a tax that goes to our general fund. Notwithstanding all of that, I respect where you're coming from, and I know that our communities of faith in particular often operate on very narrow budgets, and so we do look forward to continuing that conversation with you, and I am glad that you came in this morning. Similarly, Mr. Crouch, with respect for the tax exemptions for Troop 167, I just want to first really commend you all. I think you demonstrate collectively and individually the best of the values of scouting, community organization and leadership, and critical thinking and analysis. It's really nice to see you all. I know some of my colleagues have started this conversation with you all and will continue it. Again, the principle that's at stake here is one of fairness. We don't exempt nonprofits in general from personal property taxes, and so any exceptions we would make, we would need to understand in context of or have a framework for how we can be fair across nonprofits. That notwithstanding, I think you did a great job of summarizing. It's been sort of a complicated series of events to get the troop here, and so I wonder if there may be some opportunities for us to figure out sort of your incorporation status, and if there are ways that we can help in that regard. I will invite some of my colleagues who I think have maybe engaged in this issue to speak or say more, but if not, I will make it a point to follow up personally. I think we've got a phone number here as well as an email address about next steps here. Thank you so much to you and your fellow scouts for coming in. Ms. Sakura, appreciate your coming in, your comments on leadership and civic engagement. I know each of us has had a lot of opportunities recently to talk in great depth with you at Open Door Mondays in context of the Courthouse West plan, which we'll be talking about next on our agenda. And I appreciate the comments that you made this morning. Mr. Pedowitz, thanks for sharing about Clarendon Day. That sounds terrific, and I think this community could use some opportunities to recreate and come together. So appreciate your putting that on our radar, and thank you to the Clarendon Alliance for all of your work in pulling off that wonderful community event next week. Mr. Theo, please stay tuned on Tuesday during my chair's report. I'm going to have more about ranked choice voting. I am not organized to give it this morning, but there is more coming. I want to, as you know, speaking at least for myself, I'm generally in agreement with your positions, did want to just speak to the criticism about the delay. We had the authority to implement it, but the state has not been ready to implement it through their tabulator machines and their voting machines until this year. It would have cost us millions of dollars to provide the statewide equipment if we were to have introduced it. So we are now in a position to actually move forward now that the state has updated their machines. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation with the community for all of the reasons that you articulated that ranked choice voting can really help. And I think as we see that actually happening throughout the United States and its results in some primaries or general elections, I at least think it's been showing the promise of those results. So more to come on Tuesday. All right, colleagues, anything to add? Mr. DeFerranti and then Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your remarks cover my views. I think, I'm not quite sure if we talked about Ms. Norland, and I know that was just...
I am so sorry, Ms. Norland, and especially because that's so important to all of us, climate. So Mr. DeFerranti, you should start, and then others may want to add comments.
Sure. So Ms. Norland, I agree that there are two defining challenges of our time. One of them is climate change, and one is income inequality and racial inequities. My time is organized around, on the board, is organized around how I can help address the existential threat that I think climate presents. The recent science is even more striking and concerning. I appreciate you mentioning the Chief Climate Officer. I know that's very important. And I think you've asked reasonable questions about how we integrate climate into every decision that we do. I've done a lot of due diligence to try and work with DES to make sure that's happening. There is much more to do. I had a conversation Thursday of about an hour with staff on that. Staff is working very hard. There's a NOFA process that would lead to some significant structural changes over time, but we're also mindful of the urgency of this. With respect to paving and heat islands, our chair and I have had conversations. I know all of us care about that issue. We've had some conversations with Eco Action Arlington and need to continue that work. But I hope that that indicates, and I know that we all share the view with respect to Ms. Hakura's point, every citizen needs to be respected and listened to. I think that is absolutely the case, and we, at least I and my colleagues, we endeavor to do so. We need to keep endeavoring to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey, and then Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your comments reflecting where we are in various processes that were brought up by speakers I associate myself with. I'd just like to recognize and appreciate that the rules that we have for public comment, which has sometimes come under scrutiny, today is a demonstration of how they work. We're able to hear a multitude of viewpoints without unnecessarily getting into ad hoc public hearings in a way that's helpful for the board to figure out what people are interested in, and we had a number of issues brought up today which are all very important as we move forward in Arlington. So I will reflect specifically on Ms. Hakura's comments. Since her stated intention was to inspire us, I am inspired to reflect a little bit. You brought up really an essential tension that's existing in Arlington right now, and I appreciate and believe you are quite sincere in wanting to have our community move forward on big issues with consensus. But I will also note, as a realist, that's difficult, is reflected by the various signage that we have in the room, when on some of the major issues in our community, the perspectives are yes or no, save, destroy. It's tough to build consensus when the extremes are so rigid in terms of what it is they want. I don't say that to criticize, it's just reality. In order to have consensus, you actually have to have people who are going to come together and agree on a certain set of values. And when it comes to issues like growth and development in Arlington, we're just not there. I say that again, not to criticize, it's just where we are. So kind of what we desire may not be possible until some things fundamentally change. And as I think about the past, many people look at Arlington's past, and we've described it as the Arlington way, and we see big things that were done in this community with relatively little disagreement, or it seemed like there was a community consensus coming together. But again, as a realist, I must also point out that those periods or those efforts that we describe as being consensus-oriented excluded a lot of people from the conversation on the basis of race, economic ability, status as a renter or owner. And as we move to this period where we're bringing everybody into that conversation, it gets more difficult. But until we figure out how to come together on the same set of values, to agree and accept a certain set of facts, to be open to the perspectives that come from others as a way to reconsider maybe the perspectives that we have ourselves, it's going to be really difficult to have that consensus. So, as I hear things like, let's figure out how to provide weighted votes for some versus the others, that's not going to get us to the consensus that I think a lot of people desire. So I'll just say in closing, this is something that I think deeply about. And one of the areas of shorthand that I have with some of my colleagues, the manager, when we think about Arlington, are what are some of the things that keep you up at night? And this is the thing that keeps me up at night. How to figure out how to bring our community together so that if we can at least bring consensus to the conversation, that we don't fracture as a result. So I thank you. You have inspired me to reflect, and I thank everybody for their interests in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for covering most of the issues. Cover my comments, most of the issues. And Mr. DeFerranti, thank you for picking up Ms. Norland's comments on climate change and how Arlington responds to that. This is one of the most complex and demanding issues. And going back to Mr. Dorsey's, discussion about consensus, we just need to see how difficult these and how complex these issues are. Consensus at the end is not always an easy place. It's actually a very challenging place. It's a place that demands from everybody to not only to open up, but also to demands from us to make an extra effort to include people, to include voices, to have everybody, make sure that we have everybody around the table. This is not always very easy, and we will see in today's discussion further down when we talk about the corridor and about architecture and heights and density, how sometimes the balance between the voices that are piercing through in the policy-making process are not equitably distributed. So this is my remark, but I wanted to just to underscore the very important issues that Ms. Owens has brought to us today about the issue of deep affordability and the challenge of real displacement. That let's make no mistake. The displacement of 30%, 40% AMI households has been happening, and during the pandemic, we have seen massive displacement of these households from Arlington, from Barcroft specifically. So I do appreciate the input that the Arlington Community Foundation brought to us, the very concentrated effort to find ways to make it possible to guarantee the non-displacement of these neighbors of ours. They live practically in my neighborhood, so I feel twice as responsible for finding solutions that are viable, not only for 30 years, but even more. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I'm not going to go over issues. And I agree really pretty much with everything that was said. I will have one small disagreement with my colleague, Mr. Dorsey, talking about the past. I actually think not only were there people who weren't hurt, I think there was a lot of controversy back then. I think over time, we've all gotten used to having Metro here. I suspect it was extremely controversial at the time because any kind of major change is. People sometimes ask me why I keep doing this job, and I really do love it, in part because it's so fascinating. Arlington County, if you think about it, we have people even in this room coming to plead the case for folks who can barely afford an apartment at a very low rate, one-bedroom apartment. And then we have people who are concerned who are living in multi-million-dollar houses. And we've got everything in between. We've got extreme urbanism that looks like a huge big city, any kind of Eastern Coast big city, and we've got leafy suburbs. And there are all of these interests that we have to pull together. It's very helpful having everybody come. Today was a real good example of all of the different kinds of views that we are trying to put together. And I ask people sometimes to remember that there are, I think it's approximately 240,000 people now living in Arlington. That's a lot of people, a lot of different perspectives. And as we continue to work together, I also appreciate everybody really following the one speaker per item, and helping to keep this conversation going forward, because it's the only way we're going to work this out with the extreme diversity and changes we have. But this is a great community, and we're going to work together and continue to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This feels like a slightly pedestrian way to end after my colleagues shared some really high-level thoughts about engagement, which I appreciate very much. But I did, because Ms. Norland in my list, I really appreciated my colleague, Mr. DeFranti, speaking to that. I also just wanted to know, I feel like that old mid-aughts commercial, there's an app for that. There's a process for that. So I just wanted to say, we, in addition to our community energy plan, which we spend a lot of time talking about, right, our goals of Arlington's operations being carbon neutral by 2025, the community-wide going carbon neutral by 2050, and all that entails. We spent a lot of time talking about energy use. Ms. Norland, I wouldn't dare speak for you, but I know from previous conversations, I think you come to this question of climate change through the lens of conservation of natural resources in particular. And so if that has sort of felt lost in the conversation, or those big questions you were raising, haven't been sufficiently answered by our community energy plan, I just wanted to note, as I know you know, but in case others don't, we are also in the middle of updating our forestry and natural resources plan, an element of our comprehensive plan and an opportunity for us to talk about preservation of Arlington's natural resources. There is a virtual open house happening on Thursday, September 29th. For those who would like to learn more, you can visit arlingtonva.us and search FNRP. All right, I think we are ready then to move to our consent agenda. Let me go ahead and do that. Ms. Jacobs, have any items been pulled from that consent agenda?
We do have one item, excuse me, pulled from the agenda. It's item 34.
Item 34, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could do us a favor and please keep your comments until you get outside the boardroom so that we can keep doing our work, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, item 34 has been pulled from our item for a hearing on Tuesday. Mr. Dorsey, a motion?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the consent agenda with the exclusion of item number 34.
All right, that has been moved and seconded. Unless there's any further discussion, we're ready for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. We will hold a public hearing on that item number 34 at the start of the evening segment of our recess board meeting on Tuesday, September 20th. That public hearing will begin no earlier than 6:30. And if you'd like to speak on that item, you can do so by registering on our website starting today or call 703-228-3130. So we just voted on dozens of consent agenda items. That includes everything from minor site plan amendments to use permits to ordinance amendments and more. We put them on consent because they're non-controversial, but that doesn't mean they aren't important. So I appreciate the opportunity to take a few minutes to talk about some of those more noteworthy items. First, one of the, I think we don't have a slide to match it, but I will note that we approved several site plan amendments modifying conditions to allow conversion from ground floor retail to retail equivalent uses. What does that mean in context? That's important because we are working on allowing for adaptation of Arlington's buildings, especially our commercial buildings, to be more, we are trying to be more innovative and creative at a time, especially when office space is experiencing high levels of vacancy. So we really I wanted to take the opportunity to provide a shout out for our economic development and planning staff who have been working together to create a more resilient commercial real estate market in an era of high office vacancy. Okay, the next one. I am so excited about this. We voted just now to approve use permits at 3 sites, which are major, large-scale quality centers. Altogether, these sites total 472 new seats. I did the math on our total childcare capacity, at least as of the start of 2021. In one vote, we were able to, by supporting, of course, community-based providers, increase childcare capacity in Arlington by 8%. Right? This is really exciting. And we know we have seen definite results of our efforts to make it easier for childcare centers to open in Arlington. Those votes taken in 2019 are really paying off. But this is, of course, an opportunity to celebrate these providers and the many others who are working so hard to provide this service that is incredibly important for economic opportunity, for child development, for gender equality, and all sorts of other important values in our community. It was a good day to be able to vote for that collection. All right. We also approved an amendment to the Arlington Transit Fare Ordinance. We are reducing the transfer fee from train to bus to $0. It is really important to us to reduce barriers to public transportation, not only for equity, but because this is one of our biggest efforts to tackle climate change. Emissions from transportation represent about 1/3 of the total emissions in Arlington. We have got to get more people using more energy efficient ways of traveling, and our bus system is great to do that. We definitely know when it comes to transit in Arlington, it is a network. It is not just rail, and and as somebody who lives in a bus-rich but not rail-oriented neighborhood, I can particularly say the art fair and the ability to take art to transfer to rail for $0 is a game changer. So we're really excited that that will be going into effect. Also, just a note for those who do drive, transportation safety and our Vision Zero commitments remain a top priority. And so we voted today to decrease the speed limit in 2 locations. The first is Fairfax Drive from Arlington Boulevard to North Barton Street, and from 5th Road South from South Carolyn Springs Road to the Fairfax County line. Those are areas where our analysis, and particularly our Vision Zero lens, suggests to us that there are opportunities for decreased speed to help reduce conflicts and accidents. I also wanted to note that item 41 was a request to advertise to amend the speed limit on several other streets. For now, it'll be on the October consent agenda likely, unless we have desire for a public hearing. But again, these are really consistent with our goals. We know that speed is associated with crashes in a significant % of the time. So decreasing speed limits is one strategy of many, but one important strategy when it comes to fulfilling that vision for Vision Zero. And finally, we are excited to accept a $10,000 grant from the Virginia Tourism Corporation, particularly its Drive Grant Program. This is going to allow our Stay Arlington team to develop marketing initiatives highlighting Black historic sites, businesses, and itineraries all around Arlington. The Black Arlington experience is an incredibly representative one of American history, and we are really excited to welcoming more tourists to learn about those landmarks and narratives. All right, so with that, we are ready to move into our regular item. Ms. Jacobs, if you could please first call that regular item.
Item number 44 is adoption of the Courthouse West Special General Land Use Plan Study Document.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manager, I'm going to turn it to you to welcome our staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This morning, Tim Murphy is here to present, and Anthony Fusarelli and Jennifer Smith are also available. Over to you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you very much. So good morning, my name is Tim Murphy, and I'm a principal planner with Arlington's Planning Division. And I'm joined today by other staff from the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development, the Department of Environmental Services, and the Department of Parks and Recreation. This item is related to the Courthouse West Special General Land Use Plan Study and the potential adoption of the Courthouse West Study Document. Preceding today's hearing, in July, the board advertised public hearings on a future GLUP amendment from service commercial to medium office apartment hotel, which would accompany public hearings on a future site plan and rezoning, and the draft study document, which contains guiding principles and recommendations to inform the submission and a review of a future site plan development within the study area. As part of the advertisement of the study document, the scope was expanded to allow for discussion and consideration at today's hearing of a maximum building height of up to 16 stories. This presentation will provide an overview of the Courthouse West study, an overview of the draft study document with a focus on the building height recommendations, and a recap of the September 2022 Planning Commission meeting. First, the presentation will briefly review the background for the study. The study area is located at the western edge of the Courthouse Metro Station area and is within a quarter-mile radius of the Courthouse Metro Station. The area is located on a block bounded by Wilson Boulevard to the north, North Cleveland Street to the east, Clarendon Boulevard to the south, and North Danville Street to the west. The study area possesses a GLUP designation of service commercial, and the applicant requested a GLUP amendment from service commercial to high office apartment hotel. In July, the county board authorized advertisement of public hearings on a future GLUP amendment from service commercial to medium office apartment hotel. When considering the existing planning context for the study area, it is important to note that individual sector plans provide planning guidance for each of the metro station areas. While other sector plans within the Roslyn-Ballston corridor provide more detailed guidance regarding the land use vision and other topics, such as maximum building heights, the existing guidance for the study area results in a need to clarify the land use vision. The Courthouse Sector Plan Addendum, adopted in 1993, includes the study area within a larger area identified for higher density commercial, residential, mixed-use development, but the document does not identify appropriate GLUP designations that would achieve this vision. Like previous special GLUP studies, this study was led by an interdepartmental team of staff and conducted via a review process with the Long Range Planning Committee, or LRPC. For this study, the LRPC consisted of members of the Planning Commission, representatives of the Park and Recreation Commission and Transportation Commission, and representatives of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association and Lion Village Citizens Association. In addition, the applicant and the other private property owner on the block in the study area participated in the LRPC process. Through 2 online feedback opportunities and 2 LRPC meetings, staff participated in discussion and received feedback from the LRPC and the community on draft guiding principles and modeling scenarios that led to refinements into the preliminary staff recommendations. Following the request to advertise in July, staff held a virtual open house in September to provide an additional opportunity for community members to receive an overview of the study and recommendations and to engage in Q&A with staff. During the study, equity was a key consideration in the development of the draft recommendations with the intent to support accessibility and inclusion within the study area. The next section of the presentation provides an overview of the draft guiding principles and the recommendations in the study document with a focus on building height. This slide summarizes the draft guiding principles and in bold italics, their relationship to the different elements in the draft study document. The principles provide high-level goals for the study area and are intended to guide future redevelopment of the area. An initial set of draft guiding principles were based on adopted county guidance, including the general land use plan's development and growth goals, and they were shared at the initial online engagement session. And the principles were revised during the study process to incorporate feedback from the LRPC and the community. Feedback throughout the study also informed the development of recommendations across the 8 different elements: land use and building design, public space, transportation, housing, sustainability, biophilic design, natural resources, and public art. To develop recommendations related to the GLUP designation of medium office apartment hotel and building heights, staff considered the study area's location within a quarter mile of the courthouse metro station and also within an area identified for higher density development in the courthouse sector plan addendum, a potential building massings, general consistency and compatibility with the surrounding skyline and nearby areas, the study area's accessibility by all modes of travel, the development potential that could be achieved under a building height, and its ability to provide considerable additional housing opportunities beyond what is possible under the existing land use designation, and that would then support the county's housing goals, and establish planning practices within the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, where taller building height guidance near the edges of metro station areas have often been based on extensive community planning processes to establish that guidance along with other areas of guidance. When considering potential building massing in the study area, staff observed that a building with heights of 15 and 16 stories near the center of the study area could project nearby shadows onto nearby residential areas to the north. Staff also noted in the draft staff report that if the block of existing commercial buildings on the north side of Wilson Boulevard were to redevelop under its existing zoning up to 45 feet, that development, depending on site layout and building design, could also generate shadows that project onto these lower density residential properties north of Wilson Boulevard. This slide displays section diagrams of the 12-story illustrative modeling reflecting the recommendations found in the study document, a 16-story development scenario, and the 6-story preliminary massing scenario that was shared and reviewed with the community and the LRPC during the study. The comparison of the 3 models when looking toward Clarendon shows how the different scenarios interact within the existing skyline of development. Similarly, this slide displays 3 section diagrams of the same models looking toward the core of the courthouse area and illustrates how a maximum building height of 6 stories, 12 stories, or 16 stories would interact with the existing development. The next set of bird's eye views look east along Clarendon Boulevard toward the core of Courthouse. First at the 6-story preliminary massing scenario, then the 12-story illustrative modeling reflecting the study document recommendations, and a 16-story scenario. Another set of bird's eye views looks west along Clarendon Boulevard toward Clarendon. Shown here is the 6-story preliminary massing scenario, then the 12-story illustrative modeling, and then the 16-story scenario. Staff considers a maximum building height of 12 stories and the corresponding density under that building height appropriate for the study area. The proposed guidance recommends a maximum height of 12 stories near the center of the study area, tapering down to maximum heights of 4 to 6 stories at the edges of the study area and adjacent to an envisioned public space along Clarendon Boulevard. The map shown here overlays the study document building height recommendations with the approximate building heights around the study area. When considering the approximate existing building heights within the area, it's important to note that much of the development that has existed since before the adoption of the Courthouse Sector Plan Addendum and the Courthouse Sector Plan, which was adopted in 1981, is lower scale commercial development of approximately 1 to 3 stories. More recent development consists of taller developments. It's also important to note that the blocks to the west of the study area are within the Clarendon Sector Plan area, and that plan provides maximum building height guidance to guide future redevelopment. The study area and areas to the east toward the Courthouse Metro Station are within the boundaries of the Courthouse Sector Plan and the Courthouse Sector Plan Addendum, and these planning documents did not provide building height guidance. Heights of 14 or more stories can be seen in areas closer to the Clarendon.
Yeah, I'm on it now.
Yeah.
With other subjects, I don't want to eat till I get to hear everything.
Yeah. The illustrative modeling included in the study document illustrates one way in which development can occur, consistent with the guiding principles in the draft study document recommendations. The modeling shown here could contain approximately 270 dwelling units and 16,000 square feet of ground floor space for commercial uses. The total residential density for the model is approximately 220 units per acre, and the total commercial density is approximately 2.5 FAR. The model's residential density of 220 units per acre is approximately 90% above 115 units per acre, which is the standard site plan density for residential uses in the zoning district that is typically found with medium office apartment hotel. It's important to note that the additional density shown above 115 units per acre would need to be earned by a future site plan applicant in consideration of achieving the study's recommendations. This slide compares the development potential of the 12-story illustrative modeling identified in bold with 3 alternative development scenarios. The first alternative is a by right scenario where development occurs under the existing C2 zoning and the service commercial GLUP designation. The development in this scenario is limited to lower scale commercial development, and it would not support a vision, the study's vision for a mixed use residential development. The second alternative reflects a scenario under the recommended GLUP designation of medium office apartment hotel and the accompanying zoning district, CO 2.5, but it does not incorporate any additional density beyond the base density of 115 units per acre. The third alternative reflects a scenario where development occurs under a maximum building height of 16 stories. The modeling under both 12 stories and 16 stories incorporate additional density above the base density of 115 units per acre. And so the staff recommendation of 12 stories, as well as a modeling of 16 stories, allows for a significant level of additional development potential above the base density. In the case of the staff recommendation, almost a 100% increase, thus creating important housing opportunities and an opportunity to expand the housing supply within the study area, even though the development potentially does not maximize the maximum height within the zoning district. The next section of the presentation will provide a summary of the September meeting of the Planning Commission. At its meeting last week, the Planning Commission recommended adoption of the study document with amendments that would allow for a site plan review committee reviewing a project in the study area to consider a maximum building height of up to 16 stories, and to recommend a study to consider and evaluate the bullseye approach. The Planning Commission also recommended in a separate motion that the county seek to update its sector plans on a regular basis. In response to these recommendations, staff continues to recommend a maximum building height of up to 12 stories for the study area, as outlined in this presentation and in the staff report and draft study document. Additionally, staff acknowledges the Planning Commission's recommendations related to the bullseye approach and sector plan updates, and as part of the scoping of the 5-year review of the comprehensive plan, a project that's on this year's Planning Division work program, staff intend to explore these questions and topics. To conclude today's presentation, staff's recommendation is to adopt the Courthouse West Special General Land Use Plan study document with the existing draft maximum building height guidance of up to 12 stories. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Murphy, and please stay close. I know we will have them. I am delighted to welcome Commissioner Sarley from the Planning Commission. So glad to have you in person, sir, and turn it over to you to give a presentation from the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Crystal, and good morning, Board. My name is Leo Sarley, and I'm here on behalf of the Planning Commission. As Mr. Murphy introduced, we had our meeting on September 7th, a week ago, where we discussed this topic. Staff presented the study followed by the applicant's presentation. We heard from 19 of our neighbors, and a summary of the public comments is included in the letter that was addressed to the board on September 7th also. The Commission supports the GLUP study, which we believe advances Arlington's goals of building more housing, particularly along one of the major transportation subway lines. We were careful not to wander into details that will probably be addressed during the SPRC process. All the same, there was an early interest in the discussion of housing size, housing affordability, and the projected metro elevator advance adjacent to the property scheduled for CIP FY26 or FY29, to be verified. On the other hand, we have concerns regarding the impact of the envisioned massing and height and what that will do to the neighborhood and the neighboring properties. The PC did spend some time discussing the adequacy of the GLUP study process, the outcome of which is that more general planning is warranted. Right-sized plan encompassing a sector, whole area, or quarters will help us avoid relying on the reactive and somewhat inefficient small block-sized GLUP studies that are best suited for a last resort tool. Some of the existing plans are several decades old and need updates and better reflect our evolved community priorities and lifestyles. For instance, the definition of walkability has changed significantly since the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. To this final point, the Planning Commission recommends that our current plans be updated and maintained at regular intervals. I hope this provides you with some of the insights into the conversation of the Planning Commission, and I'm trying not to repeat what Mr. Murphy already presented, and that I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you very
so
much.
much. Yeah, please do stay close by, and appreciate the summary. All right, Ms. Jacobs, I do believe we have some public speakers, so I'll turn it to you to call the first of them.
Yes, we do. Our first speaker is Casey Nolan, followed by William Lawson.
Mr. Nolan, how many minutes did you sign up for?
2. We have 2 different Casey Nolans.
Is that right?
We have 2 different people.
That's fascinating. All right. Virtual Casey Nolan, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. We'll move on to, I see something flashing. Casey Nolan?
Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, Ms. Nolan.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Nolan, and I'm the former president of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association, as well as an apartment dweller in the Courthouse Roslyn area for the past 4 years. I think that raising the height designation for this site to the Courthouse West team's intention will have multiple positive benefits and also almost no consequences. First, starting with the lack of consequences. Apartment dwellers rarely have school-aged children, meaning that more apartments will have minimal impact on local school populations. Additionally, apartment dwellers are rarely car owners, meaning that additional apartments would have little impact on traffic patterns. Moreover, I think that the slightly longer shadows cast by a slightly taller building can hardly be counted as a consequence. What are the benefits? More taxpayers, more people to frequent local businesses, some of which have been struggling, more people to work at local companies, more people to rent local office space, also a struggle, more people to contribute to local discourse, and more people to diversify Arlington. We are not talking about a quiet residential part of our neighborhood. This is a high traffic site at the center of the RB corridor, about 5 minutes from both the Clarendon and Courthouse metro stations, surrounded by offices and retail, and mere blocks from other tall apartment buildings. I think we are using a very narrow definition of immediate when we say there are no tall buildings in the immediate area. Also, people do not operate in bullseyes, they operate in corridors, walking to and from the various shopping, eating, and other leisure opportunities between Courthouse and Clarendon. Given its central location, I frequently walk by this site, currently a rat-infested eyesore. And every time I do, I wonder why this process has and continues to take so long, especially when the difference between the county's recommendation and the Courthouse West team desire is, in my opinion, pretty trivial, especially as shown by the county's own diagram. So please expand apartment accessibility in this area so people like me can continue to live here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nolan.
Our next speaker is William Lawson, followed by Adam Theo.
Good morning, Mr. Lawson.
Good morning, thank you. I'm William B. Lawson Jr. I represent Virginia Smith. She owns the used car lot that is currently not part of the application property. The reason I came here is I want you to know that she is willing to sell, but she'll have a very big tax hit. Therefore, she's looking for replacement property to do a tax-deferred exchange. She actually did have a property, but the process has taken quite a while, and therefore she lost it. As far as the Planning Commission recommendation, I think you're more likely, Casey's more likely to get her property with that recommendation. And as far as additional height, it doesn't mean that anything approved will be that height, but it does give your Planning Commission the flexibility to evaluate whether or not it's appropriate. And sometimes height actually has less impact on neighboring property than does lower mass. So Casey and I have been scouring around looking for replacement property, but I did want you to know that if she can arrange it, that well, you'll have the entire block in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Lawson.
Our next speaker is Adam Theo, followed by Ann Bodine.
Good morning again. I'm Adam Theo, independent candidate for Arlington County Board. I just want to say I pretty much second everything that Casey Nolan said earlier. That's exactly my point, really. Don't look at Clarendon and Courthouse as they are today. Look at them as they should be. Both of those neighborhoods have much greater potential, especially together, recognized as one neighborhood as the current name of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association recognizes. A Courthouse West site at 16 stories helps to bring those two neighborhoods together as one, as they should be. I've lived on the Roslyn-Ballston corridor for 10 years now, and I understood that the entire metro corridor is one complete neighborhood. It's never really struck me as a bullseye concept in the first place. I've walked from Ballston to Roslyn and back and forth and everywhere in between tens of thousands of times, it seems like. And at no point did I think, gee, this site, this Courthouse West, should be anything less than any other building along this route. served by 2 metro stations and a dozen bus routes at least, bike lanes, sidewalks, everything else. I've undoubtedly walked, jogged, when I do jog, biked, taken the bus, even driven or ridden by that site. And please recognize that it is not one site, but part of an entire neighborhood stretching 3 kilometers. It's a great potential for 16 stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ann Bodine, followed by Jason Schwartz.
Okay. We could come back.
Okay. Next speaker is Jason Schwartz, followed by Nirja Kaur.
Good morning.
Hi. Thank you very much for letting me speak to the board today. My name is Jason Schwartz, and I'm a resident living in Courthouse. I strongly support the GLUP amendment change to allow for the site to be permitted to 16 stories. Some of the biggest concerns I have living in Arlington are safety and housing and affordability. For safety, I've taken over 100 capital bike share trips in the last year past this site, going to and from my school in Ballston. The bonus density incentives will benefit the community to improve safety, such as providing wider sidewalks and other much-needed transport infrastructure. The additional housing units will induce more non-vehicle trips, as there's only a 5-minute walk to the metro. More people walking and biking create safer streetscapes. I'm also very concerned about housing affordability. We are in a housing crisis. There's simply not enough housing to meet the demand. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments states that the DC region faces a 75,000 unit shortfall in this decade. And in a recent Arlington housing study stated, quote, the inability of the county to house prime working age adults and households earning less than 120% of the area median income at the same rates as in prior years poses a threat to its long-term community and economic sustainability. Building to 16 stories in this location is a textbook example of smart growth. What an opportunity to build housing in the most transit and amenity-rich area in the state of Virginia with limited negative impacts to the surrounding community. And you can see the picture where the traffic has actually been getting better in Arlington in many corridors. What an opportunity to add housing to prime land area where it is so desperately needed and to give more people the chance to add to Arlington's community fabric. I urge members of the board to follow the Planning Commission's recommendation to adopt the additional provision that a site plan review committee addressing any project proposed for the site may consider a mixed-use residential height of up to 16 stories. I urge the board to think long-term and to consider the most pressing issues at hand. Concerns of shadows and building aesthetics can easily be mitigated. However, not so much for the deeply concerning lackluster housing production. Arlington's growth can be a net positive for the community. We must accommodate this growth in the most sustainable, equitable, and safest way possible. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much.
We can go back to Ann Bodine, if you like.
Good morning.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, staff. Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. My name is Ann Bodine. I'm speaking today on behalf of Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future, or ASF. ASF is asking you not amend the GLUP for this parcel from service commercial to medium office apartment hotel for the following reasons. ASF is concerned that Arlington has not yet planned adequate infrastructure or services, nor budgeted for the consequences of a commitment made in 2018 under then current zoning to allow up to 63,000 more residents by 2045. That is a significant increase in population. Since 2018, the county has authorized bonus density or more intense land use for LEED certified buildings, for senior living complexes, for affordable housing complexes, for 2 new Amazon campuses, for the new Pentagon City sector plan, for the new Clarendon sector plan, and it's looking at raising height limits in Crystal City and intensely infill with Plan Langston Blvd and Missing Middle. These plans apply the same poor logic that there is no need to plan for large numbers of people that higher land use makes certain. Pentagon City plans alone will add 12,000 new people, but they got no community schools, no community-owned park, no community center. Every month, you vote on code exceptions for more infill, more massing, fewer setbacks, reduced parking ratios, or penthouses that don't count towards gross floor area. Such massive gifting to developers is shortchanging residents and is not sustainable. On Courthouse West, 12 stories, much less 16, is even before site planning piles on new density. This is not a path to true and responsive affordable housing. It's not the path to green building. It's not the path to new parks or new schools that we urgently need. Until the county settles on a new formula where the public sees full benefits from the infill upfront and forever, ASF's opposition remains. We ask that you provide here a site-specific fiscal and environmental and a demographic impact analysis, and that you project the demographic impact in a corridor that is only 5% Black. How do we explain that already low number in our newly developed areas? Isn't density the key to diversity? Absent any analysis, we do not agree to the upward ratcheting of density. I'd like to add one comment about the process. This special GLUP comes with an understanding of 20% additional affordable housing, but it's not bestowed to the community. In fact, in this process, the community doesn't get any actual benefits, but we are going from 0% residential units per acre. Then we jumped up to 115 units per acre with the base density for the new zoning or the new land use. And then staff was adding on an additional 200, or adding up to 220 units per acre. And the Planning Commission went to 270 units per acre. So we went from 0 units per acre residential to 270 units per acre, and we're getting no benefits until site planning. So I ask you to consider this process overall for other future plans. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Nir Jakar, followed by Bernie Byrne.
Thank you so much to the board and everybody for, again, taking time. I have spoken many times about the issues of traffic, and whilst traffic in the research is going down and people who are owning cars, the three traffic accidents that I have personally experienced are delivery drivers. And let's be honest, people in our community, I'm in the Clarendon Courthouse community and member of the Civic Association. We do order, and, there is a lot of traffic. And, the Danville Street is a thoroughfare through by Waze and Google, and they do use that, and they come speeding down there. In terms of affordable housing, I really don't see a true and honest commitment from any developer ever to provide that affordable housing. Providing density, I've never seen it anywhere, not in New York, not in London, not in Mumbai, not in any place across the world where density equates to affordability. Affordability, you need programs. In Europe, it's very often seen where you have shared programs, rent to buy, and this is done by the local government in partnership with developers, in partnership with tenants who then become owners. And it's nothing to do with taxpayers. So it wouldn't, but where are we thinking about that affordable housing? Also, there are plenty of 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom apartments. I have 2 elementary school children, and most of the people in our school live in apartments. And sadly, they then have to leave as their children grow and need more space if they have children of 2 different genders. Where is that 3-bedroom housing? Where is that housing for affordability for our teachers? When we asked the developer in the July 16th meeting, how much are these apartments going to cost? It was an immediate response of, we haven't done the design, we don't know. But I'm sure in their business plan, they knew exactly what was their bottom line per square foot. I implore the county to not consider 16. I would like to go back to the original first survey that they did, and the community members from Lion Village and CCCA said, as a popular vote, no more, and cap it at 6, low density. That was the original one. That was what we wanted. We are the community, and it is different to Ballston and Roslyn. It's very, very different. People like to use it for their walking, that character isn't available anywhere else. Thank you for listening.
Ms. Carr, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Bernie Byrne, followed by David Cheek.
Yes, hello. I live in Ballston, that area. I'm just talking about the open space on this one, the public space. This document describes the development of a public space that will be anchored along Clarendon Boulevard. The space will be adjacent to the intersection of Clarendon Boulevard and North Danville Street, directly opposite some some about 3-story townhouses. The document states a potential public space could allow for a mix of green space and hardscapes with native trees and seating. So that's just, it's open. It is therefore important to recognize that any such public space could have much hardscape and little green space. The public space could contain few or no native shrubs, low vegetation, or natural areas that support pollinated population, sustainability, and livability. This could be a paved plaza, and probably will be. The document states that a future park master planning process would provide opportunities for public input and engagement regarding the detailed planning and design of the public space. Further says the developer of a future development will be responsible for conducting the public space process in coordination with county staff. However, one can expect, without doubt, a future development to submit a site plan that is nothing but mowed grass, a paved plaza, and a few trees and seats in the public space. This is the least expensive type of public space to construct and maintain, and we see this everywhere. At every plaza, just about every plaza you ever see along the Metro Corridor, Crystal City, everywhere else, Amazon being an exception. There have been many precedents for this type of publicly owned private space design. In every instance in which I am aware, the developer has refused to substantially alter its original plan, regardless of any input that the public has provided during the design process. This is a developer-driven process, even if it's public. And the developer just always wants to do the cheapest thing, and if he can put chairs in there to seating for an adjacent retailer, put that there. So there'll be mostly a lawn and a few trees and maybe a couple of pollinated plants. Not much. The Rosa Corridor has too much plaza. Excuse me. The Rosa Corridor has too much pavement, too many plazas, too little green space, and too few natural areas. To enhance the corridor's sustainability and livability, please vote to make a motion and vote to require that the study document specify that the public space will primarily be a green space with native trees, shrubs, and low vegetation that will support pollinators. If you don't do that now, you're not going to see it. We'll be back again in about a year with a site plan that shows a lawn, a rather large plaza, seating for retail.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Our next speaker is David Cheek, followed by John Musso.
Madam Chair, County Board, thanks for letting me the opportunity to speak. I chat with neighbors, like homeowners and renters in my neighborhood, and what they want. And it seems like the majority wants 4 to 6 stories. Before I got involved with local politics in 2021, I heard stories from my neighbors about how in 1994, like Home Depot wanted to be built near Whole Foods by the Clarendon crossing. And it looks like a lot of residents, came out and the board, realized there was a lot of pushbacks. They listened. They came out with a different plan, which was what we have today, which makes it the most popular part of Arlington, Clarendon, that is. So the question is, is the board having the same engagement like the boards did in the past, like 1994, decades ago? And I'm just curious because I started I don't have much history with these civic associations, and I've been to the Clarendon sector plan, Wendy's, this one, and then I've watched the Pentagon sector plan. And in each instance, the developers got what they wanted, and the residents that were protesting lost. So I guess my question is the process. If it just seems like all these developments you got the homeowners who are near the site who will be impacted, and then it's them versus the developers, the county board, the county staff, the county manager, the planning commission, the planning staff, and the nonprofits who come out too. So I guess one of the last meetings with the planning commission and the planning staff and the county board, even though people came out talking about the 6 stories, there was no discussion about lower density. It was all of us who kind of showed up and spent hours waiting, were ignored. And it seems like this decision, for this one, in addition to some of these other developments, was made long ago for 12 stories. So I guess my question is why waste our time? I mean, if why do public engagement if the board knows what they're going to vote for like far in advance? Then like, I guess what's the incentive to get involved with these local politics if we have no voice? I mean, it just seems like this is all the developer being run. And this development, in any city like or county, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you look around Clarendon, it's being redeveloped everywhere. So to say like, this has to be built because we need all these units. I mean, there's going to be developments we don't even know about. And if this gets passed, all the developments down toward Roslyn will be requesting the same, like 12 to 17 stories. So I don't see the argument. If you go down to Tupelo Honey, they got a 6-story construction there with the residents over the retail. That's like a great example of what would fit here. I addressed the problems in the last county board. I'm not going to go over them, but the big one for me was the reckless driving around Clarendon and the neighborhoods with the shortcuts. Another briefer just mentioned it too.
Thank
Am I
you.
done?
Thank you, Mr. Cheek.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is John Musso, followed by Priya Shukla.
Good morning. Hi, I'm John Musso. I am the Government Affairs Manager at the Arlington Chamber of Commerce, and I am a courthouse resident for the last 18 months. I am here to reiterate the Chamber's support for the maximum height cap of 16 stories on this site within the staff's recommendation of C-0-2.5. As stated in my testimony to the Planning Commission and in our December 2021 letter, the Chamber has been a broad supporter of increased density in Arlington, particularly in the transit-rich corridors like the Ballston-Roslyn corridor. We're also supporters of flexible land policy that can best attract additional investment and residents to Arlington. The Courthouse West site is a perfect opportunity to do just that. As reiterated in other testimony, this is in walking distance of 2 metro stations. It has access to 8 different ART Metrobus lines, only a quarter-mile removed from not just the metro station, but the centers of 2 very vibrant urban villages in Courthouse and Clarendon. In order to increase affordability going forward for our community, we must remove barriers to the type of development that's going to create additional housing units, and a cap on density is a perfect example of that. We do really hope that, going forward, we should remind everyone that we have a chance to refine this process in a 4.1 site plan procedure. But going forward, we think that a maximum height cap of 16 stories is in the best interest of the community and the project going forward. So thank you very much, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much.
Our next, our next speaker is Priya Shukla, followed by Dima Hakura.
Good morning.
Priya Shukla? Okay, we will move on to Dima Hakura.
We have been placated by members of the board, planning commission, and staff that if the board does not cap height at this stage, then something under 16 stories may be considered during the site plan process. Is that fair to the developer, applicant, staff, and the community, and everyone else involved in the SPRC process? After all that time, work, and sweat, will the board truly be willing to tell everyone to go back to the drawing board for a shorter and less dense development? The real answer is a resounding no. That is why a cap on height and density must be set at this time. It is only fair thing to do for everyone. In addition, drawing out this decision will only breed apathy and cynicism in the community. Where this development is located, the CCCA voted overwhelmingly for a height cap of 6 stories. This is consistent with the survey that limited choices to 3 heights conducted by staff, where the majority of respondents preferred 6 stories. As the staff study found, anything that height would diverge from the surrounding skyline, and that is no precedent for a 16-story building directly abutting low-rise residential in Arlington. This will set bad precedent for all the county. This is a narrow area between two low-rise residential neighborhoods. Anything taller would stick out like a sore thumb. Increased population in this area is congested, tight space area will have a disruptive ripple effect into the neighborhoods and further pressurize this community. Already, there are few and overused parks and open spaces, limited schools, no community center, fights over dog poop, pedestrian and bike accidents, parking problems, and the list goes on. The small area that encompasses the Courthouse and Clarendon metro stops is already planned to receive multitudes of new residents and 10 tall developments around the metro stops. There comes a point when a further increase in population within a small area will deteriorate the quality of life for both currently present and new residents. We are at the point where deterioration will decline rapidly. You claim that equity is one of your priorities. Then for the sake of an equitable quality of life, you cannot increase height and density at this location without a cumulative impact of all these changes happening at once, especially not without adding new parks, community center, facilities, schools, parking, dog parks, green space, infrastructure, and so forth. Just as you permitted only low-rise mixed use that is only 5 stories between Wilson and Clarendon Boulevard, where it abuts residential areas and mixed use on either side between Roslyn and Courthouse, this area is no different. And the same must be done at this location in between these two same streets. Otherwise, you'll be referring to maximize the interests of the developers over that of your own citizens, and you'll be treating citizens who live within blocks of each other inequitably. I urge you to cap this development at 6 stories and have it tapered per the designs of this height that were developed by the county staff study. If you start with the assumption that consensus is unachievable, you will never get there. And dismissing those who were represented in the past, it should be represented for all. As an Arab immigrant myself, I am disappointed.
Yeah, your time has expired. Thank you so much for coming in.
Just finishing my sentence. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Scott Pedowitz, followed by Maureen Coffey.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Scott Pedowitz. I am a Virginia Government Affairs Manager at the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington, and also a more than 14-and-a-half-year resident of Courthouse. I encourage the county board to adopt the Courthouse West Special GLUP study with language that allows for consideration of heights up to 16 stories, which is consistent with the proposed CO 2.5 zoning district and the medium office apartment hotel GLUP designation. In this, I request the county board to concur in the Planning Commission's recommendation. The special GLUP study process feels like a site plan process, but it's not. So the maximum height and density will still have to be earned through community benefits, and the 4.1 site plan process will be a venue for tailoring, tapering, and molding the project. But none of this can happen if we constrain our process from even considering it. A question was raised about the distinction between the zoning as code and the GLUP study as policy. And inasmuch as I am all for being flexible with policy, especially dated policies, I don't expect that we will adopt a policy and plan to disregard it straight away. As such, adopting height guidance below the zoning district will be a de facto cap and will likely preclude consideration of even having a portion of the building be taller in exchange for a more tapered structure overall or in exchange for additional community benefits. Questions have also been raised about how such a structure would fit into its surroundings, often with an implication that an apartment building and its residents would be an imposition on others in the neighborhood. And nothing could be further from the truth. Courthouse is a transit and service-dense neighborhood that is already home to more than 7,000 people. 84% of the housing units in Courthouse are rentals, and many buildings are high-rises. This sort of site plan project could be brought under the requested GLUP and zoning would fit into our neighborhood beautifully. And let's not lose sight of the people who live here. As I said before, I've lived as a renter in a Courthouse apartment for more than 14.5 years, which is more than 1/3 of my entire life to date. In that time, I've endeavored to be an active participant in our community's life, including service to our neighborhoods as a past president of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association, and as you heard earlier, on the board of the Clarendon Alliance. I know many residents and former residents of multifamily housing in Courthouse and Clarendon who similarly participate and serve our community in myriad ways. And I have no doubt that future residents will too, if we give them the opportunity to live here. And so let's allow the site plan process to work under the medium OAH, GLUP, and CO 2.5 zoning. And again, I encourage the board to adopt the special GLUP study with these designations and without any further restrictions on building height. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Maureen Coffey, followed by Lisa Sutherland.
Good morning. My name is Maureen Coffey. I'm a renter in the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association area, a member of the Civic Association, and a former secretary of the Civic Federation. I am here to support the Planning Commission's recommendation of 16 stories for the special GLUP. First and foremost, I think we should remember that this is a special GLUP and not a site plan. There is still a whole other process working out the specifics that is going to be very important in getting to a final decision here. Housing is in a crisis in Arlington, and unfortunately, the impacts of the development decisions made today are already too late for tomorrow. We're talking about 5+ years from now. The land use plan and eventual building on the Courthouse West site will stand for decades and will define the area going forward. I used to live in Quincy Plaza, a building basically right in the middle of the Ballston and Virginia Square metro stations, a 5 to 7 minute walk to either, but directly on the corridor. That building is similarly placed to where this parcel is in the Courthouse Clarendon area. I lived on the 16th floor of that building, which was a 22-story building. If we cannot build the highest density here, a 5-minute walk from 2 metro stations, where will we build it? The sector plan and addendum that are governing this area were both established before I was born. This summer, while I was trying to find a new lease in the same area, I experienced firsthand the consequences of not having enough housing. After applying for units that were open, I would be told that someone else had been able to offer $200, $300, or more per month over the asking rent. This is a direct result of insufficient housing in our area. The county has a chance here to begin making changes that allow us, in the coming years, to bring our supply into better alignment with demand. That requires more units, and particularly where the community has agreed that they belong, on our walkable, metro-accessible urban corridor. Additionally, since I have a little bit of time left, I would like to comment on the idea that Clarendon and Courthouse residents have said that the 4 to 6 building height is appropriate. In these meetings, which I have been a part of, I have not seen a ton of people who look like me, people who are my age, people who are diverse, people who are predominantly renters. It takes a lot of time, a lot of planning to be at these meetings, to feel informed, and to feel like you can have an opinion. Just because the people who are able to show up and who are able to put their comments on record are saying 4 to 6 does not mean that represents the entirety of the community of the Clarendon Courthouse area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Sutherland, followed by June O'Connell.
Hi, I'm Lisa Sutherland. I'm a 30-year resident of Arlington on Danville Street and a member of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association, and was an officer of that association during the Home Depot consideration. 30 years ago, we bought our home on Danville Street across the street from what were then dozens of single-family homes, now known as Market Commons. 2 years after we bought our house, Home Depot secretly acquired the homes across the street to tear them down and build a mega Home Depot. They filed a GLUP amendment. After months of debate, after neighbors rallied for a different version of an urban village and worked closely with the board, Home Depot was rejected in favor of Market Commons, and an urban village was born. As part of the GLUP review, the board rejected creating a concrete jungle with little light and very high densities and heights like in Roslyn and Ballston, and instead favored an urban village. And that urban village has grown up over the last 30 years as this board's vision and is the vibrant community it is today. Now a proposal is before you to build a 16-story apartment building, and just because it's in the GLUP and there's going to be a site plan, everybody who's been through this process before knows that that's what it'll be. This building would destroy the character of our urban village that we fought so hard for. It takes the village out of urban village and just leaves urban. It would be by far the tallest building in the area, towering over almost all others, but not for long. The decision you make today will set the stage for the next 30 years. If you approve a 16-story building, every other landowner nearby will be motivated to tear down their quaint 4 to 6-story building and build a high-rise. That'll be the economic thing to do. There are already proposals to do exactly that are under discussion with the staff. And there are proposals literally in the planning stages for even higher heights than this. No urban planner thinks upclipping a single block is good planning. You must look at cumulative impacts. Once you accept this proposal, you will set the precedent for all high rises to come, and there will be many. Our civic association opposes single parcel clipping and rejects this 16-story construction in the name of affordable housing. If you allow 4 extra stories from 12 to 16, that adds 70 additional units, but only 4 units, 1 to 4 units of affordable housing per floor. Let's be honest, 1 to 4 from the developer, that means 1. So you're going to get 4 extra affordable houses, all in the name of this project. But in the reality, it's nothing more than window dressing, and it does not solve the problem. Please save our urban village you fought so hard for these past 30 years.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland.
Our next speaker is June O'Connell, followed by Brooke Alexander.
I think they look like me, and I think I look like Maureen. I think so too, for the record. Give me a moment to lower this.
Sure. It's on the side. Other side, right.
Under her. Yeah, well, but they may be smarter. I'm June O'Connell. I've been an Arlington resident for 32 years in the corridor and 23 years, and no comment on the percentage of my age, at Courthouse Metro Station. I am here today to ask you to defer this to either Tuesday or for 2 months because you need more information from the manager. First, I ask you to instruct the manager to provide you, the county board, and Arlington taxpayers with a public, transparent, verifiable report accounting for the status of the over $3.5 million of developer contributions to the Courthouse West Metro elevator. $3.5 million is not chump change. We are not suckers, and neither should you. I also ask you to instruct the county manager to come up with a plan before you approve this action to jumpstart the second elevator at Courthouse West. Background. In 2012, the Clean Energy Building provided for $1.6 million for the Courthouse West Metro Station improvement. In 2014, the Hyatt Hotel provided $1.55 million in an earmarked contribution for the Courthouse West Metro Station. In 2001, the Navy League was the first one to contribute, and I believe it was $10,000, because I think I got it, for the Courthouse Metro improvement, and there was another $180,000 for courthouse improvements. Where's the money? That's the question I have for you to ask and get a report. Is it still with the county, or did the county transfer it to WMATA? How much money is there? Do we get interest on this? The developers have contributed probably $3.5 million. What's it worth now? And why can't that be used for the elevator now? The vision study, I could be buried on Mars before you will see a park in that parking lot. We have been promised that metro. It's not a question of just courthouse. That metro and that elevator is the only ADA access to the metro platform. This is ridiculous. It is time to move on it, and you should not move on this item until you get verification that it is going forward. Further, you should not allow any development or site plan to proceed unless it is clear that the people it houses will not be subject to just the current elevator, that there will be a new elevator improvement. No new elevator, no second elevator, no new projects. That's the way you should do it. It is time for you to use the leverage with WMATA, with the manager, whom I respect and consider to be a great financial advisor as well, to get this done. Thank you, for
Ms.
your
O'Connor.
attention.
Okay, and we have Priya Shukla was able to join us, so we will circle back. Ms. Shukla?
Yes, thank you very much. I apologize. I lost track of time. First of all, I would like to thank you all for letting the residents part in this decision. I will also like to start by saying that when some of the speakers are trying to inform the board that they could not find a place to rent in Arlington, that is a total lie. Just last month, my cousin, who will be moving here for work next month, looked for rentals around the Clarendon metro area. There were plenty to pick and choose from, and he's still getting calls from the building managers. So I don't know where these people are looking for rentals, but there are plenty around this area to choose from. So having said that, when we make a decision to look for objective, I try to look for objective of the decision that is being recommended to raise the height. I was pointed to the 7 guiding principles, which the staff apparently aligned the recommendation with. Now, out of those 7 principles, 4 can be aligned just with a smaller building or smaller height. 1 is actually against higher heights, and 2, which can be supporting this recommendation, are concentrate high density development within metro station areas and increase supply of housing. Now, let me ask everyone who's in favor of this decision 3 things. In support of these two guiding principles, there are some facts that we need to look at. Did we know that the Arlington is the 11th most densely populated county in U.S. and geographically it is the smallest self-governing county in U.S.? Arlington ranks 6th in population in Virginia counties. If Arlington was incorporated as a city, Arlington will be the 3rd most populous city in the state of Virginia. With these facts, the first 2 guiding principles of concentrating high density development and increasing supply of housing, they're more than taken care of in Arlington. As a concerned resident, I request the Planning Commission, I request the board to say no to overdevelopment and yes to smart growth. We're already overcrowded. The other day, right at this location where the crossing street across Whole Foods, my 5-year-old got hit by a bicycle rider. Mindless development will only make this area increasingly unsafe for residents and families. Again, I urge you guys to think of the residents. Do not succumb to the builders. They're make us believe that county is here to protect our interests, not the builders. Builders always want more money. We don't want the county to support that. We want the county to look at the facts, to look at the objectives. Why are we doing what we are doing? Why are we making a decision that we are trying to make? And thank you again for your time, and I hope that you will look at the facts. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Shukla.
Our next speaker is Brooke Alexander, followed by Jason Harrier.
Good morning, Ms. Alexander.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My name is Brooke Alexander. I'm here today representing the Ashton Heights Civic Association and the Lion Parks Citizens Association. Our comments here are to first support the positions of our sister civic associations, Clarendon Courthouse and Lion Village, who you have or will speak today. In particular, we support the Clarendon Courthouse and Lion Village letters, which are in your packet, I believe. I will not repeat their comments. Thank you. I will reference back to the County Board advertisement hearing in July, where I shared with you the bullseye concept for the Roslyn-Boston corridor, which was the basis for each of the original 5 sector plans in the corridor. This bullseye concept is the only graphic on the county Roslyn Ballston website. I'm assuming that something that is on this website would be current county policy. Thank you for pulling up the slide. So as you can see, this policy shows that the height and density is concentrated over the metro stations proper. And the height and density both taper down to the neighborhoods and taper down in between the metro stations. This results in troughs between the stations. As you may recall, I was a citizen member of the first Clarendon sector plan in 1984. I'll let you do the math on my age. I was fresh from my 1980 land use environmental planning degree from UVA. This very graphic was given us as the underlying policy for Clarendon and the rest of the corridor. Having had this background in both the original Clarendon sector plan and my master's degree, I will say that I was horrified at the first LRPC committee meeting for Courthouse West, when one planning commissioner stated that he did not support the bullseye concept for the corridor, and that he thought it should be a spine of high development over the whole metro tunnel. This proposed building sits smack in the trough between 2 bullseyes in the corridor. It will be precedent setting for all the other troughs. In fact, the county has already received one more of these attempts to negate this long-term policy for the RB corridor. And this is only one of the lots that will potentially be affected by the precedent set by upzoning Courthouse West. We look for you to stand behind this long-term policy. If the policy is to be changed, it should be done by you, the county board, not backed into by the action of a committee of a commission. No offense meant. But this would be a policy change. This is the county board's job. Please undertake the appropriate study before making a decision. As staff pointed out in their report, this document does not address larger questions about or recalibration of the building height and density along the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, which from staff's perspective should be undertaken more comprehensively and not in isolation of one development block. And I agree. This study should look at building height and density in the troughs in the whole corridor more comprehensively. Look at the services required for the additional population that will be brought in. We cannot plan one block at a time. It adds up to more density and no overview of supplying appropriate fire, police, schools, stormwater runoff capacity, and parks. We need to plan for these services and then defend them. The 10th Street Park, which was on the general land use plan, was not defended, and it is at risk. We want the continued success of the RB corridor. We need to make good decisions going forward. We would like to be part of that effort. If you decide to make a decision to raise the height and density of this parcel today without undertaking this study, Ashton Heights and Lion Park support capping the height at 6 stories. Thank you for your efforts on our behalf.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
Our next speaker is Jason Harrier, followed by Lisa Chavez.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Jason Harrier. I am president of the Lion Village Citizens Association, and I'm speaking on our behalf. I have a request and I have some comments on the process that we've been following here. First, the request. So Lion Village Citizens Association, we're requesting to defer consideration of this item for 90 days to allow the nearby civic associations to work with staff to see if we can come up with an approach for this amendment that everybody can support. So at this point, none of the surrounding or nearby neighborhoods support the recommendation of the Planning Commission and staff. Our neighborhoods, however, are working towards consensus, and we'd like the opportunity to work with the Planning Commission and staff towards an agreement. In creating and amending sector plans in the RB corridor over the last 40 years, the board has always sought to obtain the support of both nearby neighborhoods and property owners within the plan area. Just as one example, in 2006, the Clarendon plan amendments didn't go forward until the county board, until the 5 surrounding civic associations and property owners were on board. The county has adopted this approach in the past for a couple reasons. First, it assures that neighborhoods and property owners, having supported the plan or the changes that they'd like to make, would not later oppose development consistent with the plan. And second, it provides assurance to developers that the building proposals consistent with the plan would move through the county process relatively quickly. This process has worked really well over the last 40 years, and virtually all of the development proposed for the Clarendon plan area and the western portions of the courthouse plan area have been supported by the surrounding neighborhoods. It's also allowed site plan proposals to move through the county process relatively quickly. This has allowed the community, including the review commissions, to focus on traditional site plan review issues like building materials and garage entrances, the location of retail and so forth, and not be so absorbed with basic zoning issues with little time to reach those issues. Next, I wanted to have a couple comments on the process. And so this proposal and the courthouse plan amendment have proceeded under a far different process than I just described above. First, this proposal is limited to about 3/4 of a small block right now. I know that an earlier speaker mentioned that the other 25% might be up, but right now it's a 75% of the block. Second, Clark plan is seeking a height and density that's roughly triple or quadruple what is currently allowed under the current plan. And third, there's been no serious effort to bring the surrounding neighborhoods into a special process, as well as one that places the Clark site in its much larger context. In fact, this particular application looks more like spot zoning rather than seeking permissions for the surrounding property owners that can have under the plan. And so on a larger level, we see this process being followed as posing several long-term dangers for the county. One, and as many other folks have mentioned, this is setting a dangerous precedent. Such a major departure for such a small site in a planned area sets the precedent that other developers, and I think some have, including Inline Village, to seek similar changes in other areas of the county. That presents a problem for the folks living there, and it also presents a problem potentially for the board, because if you say no to those later challenges, you're opening the door for legal issues. Why did you say no to them and you don't say no to this group? So in conclusion, this planning process that the county board has followed on the RB corridor has worked well over the years, but this particular process is a lot different than that. The engagement of the community, then the surrounding neighborhood associations, has been critical to the past success, and we just would really like to see that now. So we think the county should defer this and try and see if we can reach a consensus between the county, the planning commission, and all of the neighbors. In past efforts to amend the plans, we've seen neighborhoods give quite a bit, and we think that that might be the case here as well. And so thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harrier.
Our next speaker is Lisa Chavez, followed by Casey Nolan.
Good morning, Ms. Chavez.
Hello, members of the board and all the fine Arlingtonians watching at home. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association. And I won't go over the details of the letter that we sent to the board, but I will note that there are a number of things in the entire process of planning this site that have been extremely challenging for the association. We have a diverse association. We have anywhere from low-income housing to million-dollar, multi-million-dollar homes in our neighborhood. And it's always a challenge to have a representative sample of citizens participate. In this particular process, which was mostly online with a survey released in the dead of winter, it's even more difficult for an association or even the county itself to ensure diverse perspectives are considered. We have seen significant demographic changes in our neighborhood over time, and we have seen our lowest income residents pushed out. And It's troubling, and I think you're hearing some of the anxiety today with some of residents from our neighborhood as well talking about the housing crisis and the difficulty in finding affordable housing. And as we discussed this particular site, that was a continuing concern of residents, the lack of affordable housing. And while we recognize that this site provides a number of opportunities for housing, this site will also be a tremendous change from the current density as allowed by right or by site plan. In fact, this would triple the density allowed by site plan, roughly. And that is part of what caused a major concern within our association, which led to the recommendation to cap the height at 6 stories. As Mr. Dorsey mentioned earlier this morning, it's not always possible to reach consensus, and we recognize that. But as a whole, the Civic Association is still committed to reasonableness. And while we understand that there is some interest in residents for higher density, there's also interest in lower density. And there's reasonableness in some of this particular plan that the county staff set forward. And some of that includes the design elements, some of the expectations for how the site might be oriented. But what we haven't seen is a commitment or direction for how that will play out in the site plan process. And yes, the site plan is a time to refine the vision and to get down to the nitty-gritty and details. And it's difficult when we're not really sure what size this building is going to be, because that does inform the kind of community benefits to be expected. An increase in density of 3 times the current allowed amount would represent a significant windfall for the developer that we believe the county should share in. It's not just the current neighbors, it's not just the future neighbors, it's the county itself. And we expect the county to uphold their end of the bargain in any type of density increase on this site. This kind of block by block planning is extremely challenging for neighbors. It's a considerable amount of time and dedication, and usually neighbors have maybe 1 or 2 comments at the end, particularly when we're dealing with online sessions. That's very difficult for neighbors, whether you're busy or not busy. It's very, very challenging. And block by block planning like this, without the context of a larger study, leaves most residents dissatisfied. And that, I think, is a consensus that we all have. And what we're looking for in particular is for the county to stop putting the residents through this. Keep planning on a macro level, leave site plan for the micro level, look at the sector plans, update them, and make those changes accordingly. It's frustrating to hear that a site is quote unquote unplanned, particularly when residents have been planning this site and residents have advocated for more detailed planning, including Clarendon sector plan, having this particular site included in that, and then again revisited at the envisioned courthouse plan, which started around 2013. So it's challenging to hear that we're both too late, it's too old, and it's still unresolved. And when we're looking for improving the inclusion and equity measures across the county, this kind of site-by-site planning is never going to lead to a great result. It might lead to an okay result, but it's never going to be on par with the expectations that most residents have of the county. And we're serving not just the current residents, but we want Arlington to work for future residents as well.
Thank you. Chavez. Our final speaker is Casey Nolan.
There's a second.
Different
There are
Casey
2
Nolan.
Casey Nolans today. What are the odds? Mr. Nolan, if you wouldn't mind from the podium, that'd be great. Welcome.
Good morning. Yes, there are 2 Casey Nolans. Good morning, board members, staff, and members of the community. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the special GLUP study for the proposed Courthouse West project from the applicant's perspective. My name is Casey Nolan, and I help lead the local development team for Arlington-based CRC companies. Thank you to the county staff for its work on the study, and thank you to the community for your participation in LRPC meetings, planning commission meetings, and the online engagement opportunities. This morning, I'll try to be brief and highlight a few areas that had comments or questions in recent public meetings. Courthouse West is a gap in the RB corridor. Completion of the special GLUP study with a height of up to 16 stories will enable density and housing to be developed where it belongs, less than a quarter-mile walk from the existing metro. This project will also enable significant community benefits to be realized by the county and neighborhood. The site has substantial public infrastructure in place. While it is a 5 to 6 minute walk to 2 existing metro stops, the pedestrian commute will become even shorter when a future courthouse metro elevator is constructed 1 block away. The planned metro infrastructure will reinforce the spine in the courthouse neighborhood, and a project can still taper north and south through the existing residential neighborhoods. These excerpts from the county's master transportation plan and a WMATA study depict the new metro elevator and how the quarter-mile radius from metro will greatly expand. Improvements to the existing courthouse metro elevator and a future metro elevator entrance only reinforce the walkable nature of this transit-oriented development site. Staff has done an excellent job laying out the planning history. I wanted to also reinforce that this study is not like some prior special GLUP studies in that there is a sector plan in place. This is not an overlooked parcel in the heart of the RB corridor. There's clear guidance on it being in a higher density commercial residential mixed-use district. There's also clear guidance in county documents on tapering and density goals. Tapering is not a guideline between metro stops along the spine. Tapering is only a guideline to the residential neighborhoods which are north and south from this site. Density is targeted within a quarter-mile of metro. These county guidelines led us to believe CO was the appropriate category for this block. CO has a height cap of 180 feet, which corresponds to 17 to 18 stories. Staff has recommended a medium density category of CO 2.5 and a height cap of 12 stories versus the 16 stories allowed in the zoning category. Our recommendation is to enable height up to 16 stories and design flexibility during the 4.1 process to achieve more community benefits and more housing in this location. The study document has 7 guiding principles which we support. Among them is tapering of the building massing and designing the site to achieve sunlight and air. While this is schematic in nature, the images on the left depict how a building could be laid out to achieve those guiding principles with open space facing south and residential bars of a building taper from 16 to 12 stories. We have experienced molding buildings to achieve stakeholder goals, such as the images shown of the Clarendon apartments along Hudson Street abutting Lion Village. That project went through the 4.1 process and had tapered massing as well as the iconic archway for pedestrian and vehicular connectivity. I've shared the schematic ground floor image before, however, I want to reiterate that additional analysis and discussion of community benefit details are inherent in part of the 4.1 and SPRC process. I also wanted to provide an update on the public engagement process, which we feel has been both robust and inclusive. Through this process, the county will have held 11 public meetings or online engagements. We have led over 20 meetings ourselves since 2019 and also stood up an online community engagement website before the pandemic to complement the ongoing process and have over 900 followers. We respectfully recommend the county board vote to approve the Courthouse West Special GLUP study with an amendment to remove the height cap recommended by staff. Our recommendation is consistent with that of the Planning Commission. The density and height up to 16 stories will come with significant community benefits. In closing, we thank the county board, staff, the Planning Commission, and community for the time and meaningful dialogue that has occurred. We hope continues. We feel our firm, the Courthouse West project, are well positioned to be part of the solution to the regional housing crisis while activating an underutilized transit-rich site in the heart of the Roslyn-Boston corridor with a sustainable building where people can live, work, shop, and play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Appreciate that. I believe Mr. Nolan is our last speaker.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you so much to all who came to share what I think are truly a variety of perspectives and surfacing what I think are some really meaningful, broader issues about this planning context as well as this particular special GLUP study. I think that it makes sense to begin with some questions before we entertain motions from colleagues. I see the following categories. I think we have probably quite a bit of questions and discussion to be had on the planning context here. And I mean that both geographically and also how a special GLUP study fits into the context of our general land use plan, our other comprehensive plan elements, how it relates to a site plan, et cetera. I think we also want to talk with some specificity and perhaps ask some questions about heights. And then I'm going to, maybe a third category, we'll call it additional impacts, recognizing that the specifics of traffic circulation, parking requirements, community benefits would come through a site plan. I think nevertheless, there are maybe some questions. One I look forward to getting into regarding the Courthouse Metro second elevator construction. So anything else to add beyond planning context, height specifically, and additional impacts? All right. Why not launch into the biggest one and talk a little bit about the planning context here? Mr. Dorsey, you want to start us with comments and questions?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So would love for staff to just provide a little bit of a historic background on this particular site, being, as many people have described it, as unplanned and being at the service commercial level in the GLUP. Can you just give us a neat little narrative about how that has come to be?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the site is planned. I do want to clarify that from the start. There are two sector planning documents associated with the study area. The first being the Courthouse Sector Plan, which was adopted in 1981. That document identified the study area as part of a larger area that was identified as commercial. 12 years later, the County Board adopted a Courthouse Sector Plan addendum in 1993, and that document identifies the study area as part of an area that's identified for higher density commercial residential mixed use development. It also identifies other designations for other areas within the Courthouse Metro Station area. What the Courthouse Sector Plan addendum does not do is identify what GLUP designations would potentially be appropriate and realize that higher density commercial residential mixed use designation or label. And so the special GLUP study was undertaken to help clarify what designation or designations could be appropriate to realize the vision of the Courthouse Sector Plan addendum for higher density development.
Thank you.
Mr. Cantonis, to follow up?
Thank you so much for this explanation. Can you add just a reaction on why this is not spot zoning?
Thank you for that question. So the county has a special GLUP study process that I believe the board created back in 2008 for instances when a request to look at the general land use plan for a site is made by a property owner. Then these requests are made in instances where there's some potential lack of specificity in the existing specific planning guidance for that site, or the location of that site is in an area that is quote unquote unplanned outside of a metro station area, and there's not a specific sector plan or corridor plan that provides specific planning guidance beyond a general land use plan designation. Does that help provide?
Yes, I mean, what this tells me in the context of what you answered to Mr. Dorsey's question is, this is not a radical, a small piece of land that is radically repurposed for something completely, unexpected or out of any possible context with, the adjacent planning environment and actually delivered urban environment. Residential and commercial urban environment. So therefore, it doesn't, fulfill not in the slightest the definition of spot zoning. So, thank you.
If I could, Madam Chair, to just leave, just to make sure I'm processing this correctly, Mr. Murphy. So essentially what I'm hearing is this site has, in terms of the most contemporaneous planning that we have for recognizing that is in fact, 30 years old, has always contemplated mixed use, medium levels of density on this site. What this process was really all about was figuring out specifically what that means for us today, given the elapsing of time between when that was last considered. Is that reasonable?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw, Mr. DeFrenti first, if you don't mind, and then Ms. Garvey. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So
Mr. Dorsey's questions, you tracked the history of the relevant documents with respect to this plan, this site. I'm wondering if you can, and I think this is in this bucket of questions, but if you can tell us a little bit of the context on this debate with respect to bullseye. And I've heard other terms. We've heard the spine, and I think I mentioned in July, or if I haven't, there's talk about a saddleback, and want to see if you can give us the chronology of that, because we did receive a letter, and I wanted to get your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the bullseye concept, as it were, was a concept that originated in the 1970s as the county was beginning to plan for the creation of the metro lines through Arlington. I believe a report from 1972, RB 72, Alternative Land Use Patterns, is the planning document that was generated at the time that includes the bullseye concept graphic. And that report was really used as a planning concept that looked at 3 different kind of alternative visions for the Roslyn-Ballston corridor at the time, to engage in community discussion about what might be appropriate for the future planning of the entire corridor. The results of that discussion at the time were the formation of the Long Range County Improvement Program in 1975. And as part of that, what was adopted and added to the general land use plan were the development and growth goals, which really speak to concentrating high-density development within a quarter-mile radius of metro stations, tapering to surrounding residential areas as well. One thing that's not included in those development and growth goals is tapering along, if you will, the spine of the metro corridor. And so those development and growth goals were adopted in the mid-70s into the general land use plan, and those helped inform the creation of the 5 different sector plans for each of the metro station areas within the RB corridor.
So just to clarify, you said the idea of tapering between the metro stations is or is not?
It is not included in the development and growth goals. They do speak to tapering toward residential areas, but not between stations.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Sorry to cut you off.
Thank you. Really basic question. Remind me, what can be done by right? So if someone doesn't want to deal with any of this, they just want to build something, what can they do?
So the existing zoning for the study area is C2, and that is our general commercial, service commercial zoning district. What could be done there is a service commercial use, so it could be retail, it could be office.
And how high? That's how high?
How high? 45 feet.
Which is how many stories?
Approximately 4 stories.
4 stories, okay, all right. That's helpful. So once they go over, if a developer or builder wants to go over 4 stories, they got to come to us, right? And then it has to go through the planning commission because we have a whole process that works when people can have input at that point. And that's where we start talking about the tapering and the setbacks, right? And that's how, so if somebody wants to do 4 stories, I thought it was 6, so I'm glad I asked the question. If they want to do 4, it could be just a box, we have nothing to say about it. But as soon as they want to go over that, they have to come to us. And we I would say we probably, is it fair to say we kind of have 2 goals? One, to see that whatever the design is fits well and kind of works in the space. And then the other is that we want to make sure that the extra income that the builder or developer makes, we share in that profit, if you will, and help. We get, affordable housing, we get parks and all of that kind of stuff. I just kind of wanted to review how it works and make sure I'm actually understanding it correctly. Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. So I found that incredibly helpful, that sort of line of discussion, Mr. Murphy, in response to Mr. DeFranti's question. One of the things I'm trying to think about how to articulate here, understand, and this may be a good question for you or for your colleagues in the comprehensive planning department. When we have a sector plan, especially a more recent one, we know that that can precipitate not only changes to our zoning ordinance or our GLUP, but to other comprehensive plan elements, or at least inform the updates of those comprehensive plan elements. When we have special GLUP studies, it is a little less clear to me how we do that, right? Like there's not this sort of codification exercise that we engage in with respect to our public spaces master plan and others. And yet we do find ourselves doing a fair number of these special GLUB studies. Can you give us just at a high level some insight into how other elements of the comprehensive plan consider not just newly adopted sector plans, but changes to the GLUB facilitated by or enabled by special GLUB studies?
Yes. One example would be like the Public Spaces Master Plan, which was updated just a few years ago. And that document speaks to achieving the public spaces. One of the major goals in that is achieving the public spaces that are in the county's adopted sector plans, area plans, and other plans, which would include special GLUB study documents that exist as county policy. So in the instance with the Courthouse West study document, one of the recommendations is regarding the provision of public space. And so it fits seamlessly with the public spaces master plan to realize that vision within the study document.
And what about when we have something as specific as, for example, the Public Spaces Master Plan has kind of level of service implications for how many tennis courts we'll need, for example. Again, that's the type of thing that we might update based on sector plans. We would look to special GLUB studies and their outcomes to think about that as well?
Yes, in future consideration and updates to the Public Spaces Master Plan, that planning process would incorporate the additional planning guidance that is now in place.
Okay, excellent. I think I'll just say for my part that when we talk about the relationship of special GLUB studies to the comprehensive plan, I think there's sort of two issues at play here. One is, are we literally prepared as a community with sufficient public facilities and other roads and infrastructure to meet that? I have some confidence, right? And I think Mr. Murphy illustrated that well, that as a technical matter, we do. I think there's also the question, and I think this was really compellingly by Ms. Chavez and Mr. Harrier in context of trying to organize their neighbors of, when we do these special GLUB studies, does the community have the context that we all so crave, that sometimes comes about from a sector plan? So I think it's important to distinguish between those two, lest we be seen as adding or approving impacts that this community is unprepared for as a matter of policy or infrastructure. So I appreciate that discussion. I guess, I don't know if there's, Ms. Garvey, please.
No, that's a vestigial light.
Sorry, do you want, and then I have one other question.
Sure. So I had a question. Of the draft plan, page 1, it sort of touches on special GLUB studies. There have been 11, and I'm trying to recall the Washington Kirkwood and some of the other studies. And this may be a question for you or Mr. Fusarelli, I don't know. The studies have been small physically, and have those special GLUB studies been used in this approach to kind of, what I think we learned is that we had the big parameters of sector plans, and we have slowly narrowed to a smaller area for planning. And is that kind of how special GLUB studies, I guess two questions. One is, do I recall correctly on Washington Kirkwood being relatively small physically? And then second, is that sort of right? You have the big guardrails, and as you get closer to planning and building out, you get special GLUB studies that in some cases that have helped sort of clarify and narrow those parameters and interpret what is big picture. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's correct. You're correct in that there have been 11 completed special GLUB studies since, I believe, since 2008 when the process was formally created. In terms of the geographic area for those studies, I think they can range in size. One example, I think on the larger end, would be the Shirlington Special GLUB Study Plus from a few years ago. Washington and Kirkwood was another Special GLUB study, I believe, from 2017, where I think the size was slightly larger potentially than this study area, but they can range in size from smaller sites to, I would kind of put Courthouse West kind of in the middle of the spectrum, if you will. And you're correct that these studies are intended to help clarify the land use vision and provide a comprehensive suite of guiding principles and recommendations to help inform a future site plan application and the review of a site plan.
Great, that's helpful. I kind of see it expectations when you're at a big picture level and then expectations when you start to build out. And that helps me kind of, and I was watching the July hearing, and that is part of why I still recall Mr. Dorsey's comments that for me, at least, it doesn't fit to say 6, 12 at least is where I would need to be, because we have built out now, and that's what we would, the comment person, I think, would expect that. So thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question is sort of on this point of these in-between planning exercises. And Mr. Sarli, I might also ask you, because I know the Planning Commission talked a lot about, I think you gave us the advice to direct staff to actually update all of these sector plans, right, which would be the gold standard. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on the following question, along with Mr. Murphy's or anyone from planning. So aside from being able to do, which I think if we had unlimited resources, the idea of actually updating all of the Orange Line corridor sector plan sounds terrific. I'm not sure that's at all feasible. But I do think, and Ms. Alexander's comments are really ringing in my ears here, that there needs to be a codification of a policy, or at least a sort of philosophy, if we are shifting to more of, a spine philosophy. I really appreciate your points that the bullseye, at least as recognized formally by our policies, has always been about stepping down to the neighborhood, not along the corridor. I would find it to be helpful to have an adopted policy, one, of course, in conversation with the community, that captures and codifies an expectation about development along the metro corridor. I will say for myself, by way of associating myself with the idea of a spine, that the idea of suppressing density in places that are blocks for metro stations, in order to sort of achieve a taper between those stations, I think that's pretty inconsistent with our adopted goals in the Affordable Housing Master Plan, in the Community Energy Plan, and the Master Transportation Plan. That doesn't mean there is not respect for the principles and conversations that 40 years ago helped lay the basis for a very, what I think has been a very successful community conversation, but I do think, or community period. I do think, though, the way that our transportation network has developed, the way attitudes about walkability to metro have changed in the ensuing 40 years. To me, I do think we need to be talking about this more in context of a spine. That is should be an adopted policy that all can expect, the community, the development community, our staff and others. I'm recognizing I'm not speaking for the whole of the board there. If we wanted to go about taking up that conversation, aside from updating each of the sector plans, is there some sort of planning exercise? I'm thinking, for example, I learned from Mr. Fusarelli earlier this week about the Ballston to Courthouse Urban Design Study, which I think is maybe like 36 years old at this point. But is that the kind of vehicle, is there a planning vehicle or process that could allow us to talk about that kind of philosophy of development without doing that, the full-scale sector plan, which would, of course, take years site by site?
Yeah, I think so. And I noted previously in the presentation that one of the projects on the Planning Division's work program this year is the 5-year review of the comprehensive plan, which occurs on a set basis where staff goes and reviews the updates to the comprehensive plan over the last 5 years. As part of this upcoming 5-year review, staff, via the scoping of that initiative, is considering ways to try to bring in some of these bigger picture questions that were raised by the Planning Commission related to how we think about the corridor, how we think about planning for the Roslyn-Ballston corridor and the different metro station areas. And so I think that could be an opportunity to bring some of this thinking to light for the community and for the board.
Great. Okay. So the 5-year comprehensive plan and be sort of the main vehicle, but there might be some ways to bring this update in. Mr. Sarli, I know you guys talked about this on the Planning Commission. So are there any insights, beyond what I think was well captured in your letter that you would add to this conversation?
Not too much. I think you've captured the idea. We're just a little nervous about, so like in our discussion, one of the conversation points were, are we getting ahead of planning? Yeah. And, versus respecting the planning process and sort of, so one of the intent of the Planning Commission was to try to get ahead, to point out that we're missing some information on this and do exactly as Mr. Murphy has mentioned, to do like an overall master plan to make sure we're sort of doing the right thing holistically versus just the sort of, Band-Aid approach. without being pejorative in any way, it's a good tool. It's just, I feel like a bit of a last resort, or the Planning Commission. So that's it. But yes.
You are much more generous to the tool of special GLUP studies than I would be. I find them very frustrating for all the reasons we've talked about. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, I have now monopolized, and I think other colleagues
Yeah, I'll
have
just
thoughts.
follow up a little bit on what you've been talking about, Ms. Crystal. I think probably some sort of overall discussion of the idea of bullseyes and spines. I'm assuming that part of the idea was to have sort of an interesting skyline. I'm worried that somebody might think that we're going to suddenly, as a spine, we're going to put a wall down, which I don't think we have in mind at all. And probably included in this community discussion might be some, going back over urban design principles and those things. I'm thinking a little bit of a webinar. We kind of all have to keep ourselves kind of thinking about what are sort of the basic design ideas before we get to the definite application. So I think something like that, kind of a public webinar, I'd be interested in at any rate. I think that could be very helpful. And then the 5-year comprehensive plan, one of the things that made me think, which is associated with this and a lot of other things we're talking about, I think people keep coming saying that we haven't planned, we don't have enough roads, we don't have enough transportation, we don't have enough schools, we don't have enough parks, we don't have enough, and every single one of those parts of the capital plan addresses that. So I think we need to find a really clear way to message that to our public that, I think as you said, you're confident we can do it, but other people are not aware, and if you're not aware, then you're not confident and you don't think it even exists. So I think that's another sort of public communication piece that we maybe could be doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Mr. Carantoni.
Just to add to that, I'm really interested in the fact that the Planning Commission actually openly said that, or at least a few commissioners openly said that the bullseye concept is reaching its historic limits. This is how I read it. That means that we have seen enough evidence that this may be the case. I can speak for myself. I mean, the bullseye concept was, the assumption was that the mass transit riding population would be, would be best served if they would be close to the transit station. Washington, D.C. and the entire metropolitan area is the one and only American city that had a heavy rail system installed after World War II. So this, immediately there was a need to give guidance about how the land use had to structure around these new lines in, the map of 1968. So in Arlington and Montgomery County, I believe, also they settled on the bullseye concept because back then there were only two models. It was your car or the mass transit, and that was it. So if you were a little bit further away, and you would be assumed not to actually walk and choose the other. But today we are in a multimodal world. The people can, and short-haul urban mobility is absolutely paramount. And so density tends to distribute in a different way. And I think that from the point of view of quality of life, distributed density is more desirable. My question is, how is the planning, our planning department going to digest that, and how are we entering in the 5-year review of the comprehensive plan with this question mark?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that is a key consideration going into the 5-year review. Understanding that the way residents and stakeholders in Arlington utilize transit, utilize other modes of travel than the personal vehicle, and how that influences kind of walk sheds, et cetera. That's definitely a consideration that factors into the 5-year review and kind of looking and exploring some of these bigger picture questions.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, I'll just add to this, less people interpret that we're coming to bury the whole concept of the bullseye. I think for the time that it was created, it was actually very smart and appropriate. It's just that we have the benefit of seeing life, technology, and everything else evolve. And we just simply know that a blunt distance based from a particular point is not really the way people experience their desirability to use transit. And as we just look at this particular site, proximity aside, it's a gentle, very easily accessible path, not just because we have scooters and buses and everything else that allow you to get there, but for people who are in perhaps a personal mobility device or just people walking with a toddler in a stroller. You've got wide sidewalks that are in pretty good repair, gentle slope. It's incredibly useful, and that can contrast very distinctly and differently than people maybe perhaps at a similar proximity, but who have less walkable paths because of slopes and sidewalks and everything else. So it complicates our path moving forward, but at least as we look at this particular site, I am encouraged that when it comes to transit proximity, this is really hitting all the boxes that experience has told us really matter when it comes to transit accessibility.
Well, and I think what's so interesting about this conversation, if I can muse just a little further, is there is a lot included in that word, right, or that metaphor of the bullseye, or sometimes called the taper. There is the distance that was considered and might now be different than walkable to metro. There is how much density is concentrated in each concentric circle of the bullseye. So, I think there are ways in which we can recommit ourselves to that fundamental planning principle of more density where we have transit to support it, but still really want to talk about some of the elements that comprise it and ensure that our expectations match a world that is full of micro-mobility, right? That wasn't the case 40 years ago is just one example. Mr. DeFerenti.
I was ready to offer a little thought on the bullseye, but then move us to the next bucket, if that's okay. So this, I was taken a little bit by Ms. Garvey, and a spine, actually, if you look at a spine, it's not all just a wall, and they're also, so I do think that we have moved beyond, I believe we have moved beyond the spine, and that there's appropriate context with the special GLUP study as it relates to this site. With respect to the height, the second bucket, I guess it would be helpful if we could try to get, from the staff presentation, we could try to get slide 12 up there. Because for me, a spine does not lead me to know exactly between 12 and 16 what the precise height would be. It leads me to say that less than 12 I don't feel is appropriate. But on that slide, there's, that's the one with the shades, and we've modeled 16 stories. I think we modeled 12 stories, but I'm not sure. I think it's fair to say that that weighing, being in the shade for some part of your day is a different policy priority that we need to weight, but we also really need to weight the amount of supply of housing that we have, which is critical. But I guess for Mr. Murphy, we've done 16 stories. We haven't done 12 or 14 stories, those sorts of we haven't modeled those, is that correct?
They have.
Just to clarify, from a shadow study perspective?
Yes.
So we have, what's included in the draft study document is a shadow study of up to 13 stories. And so that reflects that heights of around 13 stories do not project, based on our modeling, do not project shadows onto lower density residential areas. As we start to move above that height, we do start to see some projection of shadows onto those lower density residential areas further north.
Got it. I am corrected, and I guess for me, there's in our documents, there's a piece that I guess initially there might have been Roslyn and Ballston might have been seen to be slightly more dense a number of years ago. And I think we got analysis from staff regarding the closest buildings currently not being at 16 stories, at least for the most part. Is that, I guess with respect to that last part, there's, is that accurate? And there's immediate vicinity, and then there's sort of near vicinity. Can you speak at all to what the immediate vicinity looks like and, as you get into Courthouse and up to Ballston?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it would be helpful, I can flip ahead to another slide that was included in the presentation that looks at the surrounding context. Here we go. So in terms of existing heights, we do see kind of within this close vicinity, heights of 16 stories within a few blocks away. Those buildings are closer to the metro station, to the Courthouse metro station. You pointed out, as we zoom out even further, looking at the entirety of the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, we do see heights that exceed 16 stories, well above 16 stories in the Roslyn metro station area, in the Ballston metro station area as well. And so those heights, based on kind of those original sector plans that were originally developed, I believe each sector plan had a vision for the metro station, that particular metro station area.
Thank you. I may have other questions, but I'll pass.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Karantonis on heights?
Oh, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as it relates to the heights, so your shadow studies, even though you didn't go incrementally above 13, is it fair to say that at each successive story, we're talking about incremental as opposed to exponential changes to the shadow impacts?
That's correct.
And could you also, thank you, and could you also discuss a little bit, I wasn't quite clear, what the conclusion is by the shadow studies that look at potential redevelopment at up to 45 feet of some of the areas north, casting an impact? Would that be an impact in additional to this building, or could that be an impact that would obviate any impact of this building, if I'm making any sense?
Absolutely. So depending on what the redevelopment of that building looks like, the massing that we did was very much kind of the maximum based on the zoning that you could do with the C2 zoning. That would potentially create a shadow that would overlap, if you will, with shadows generated from the study area.
Got it. So we could end up with a situation where, and I'm not saying that this is the suggestion, but we were to protect shadows with this particular piece, and that work could be undone by what is allowable by right with development just to the north.
That's correct.
Okay.
Excellent insight. Thank you, Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. So, shadows are important because they change the environment, the living. It's a quality of life issue. One thing to me that's also important is the proportion of the building to the street and what's across. So the enclosure of the street and the vistas, especially at pedestrian level, because one of the goals here is obviously to activate the pedestrian realm and have this vibrant, nice community where everybody appreciates a very high delivery and quality of life. So how did this, flow into the considerations?
Yes. So building height transitions from the study area to the surrounding area was a key consideration during the study process. One of the study documents guiding principles speaks to future development, working and fitting harmoniously within the surrounding context. And we heard that via the feedback form from the initial online engagement session, that transitions, particularly along the two boulevards, would be key considerations for the development of recommendations. As we developed our building height recommendations, one of the things that we ended up including were recommended maximum heights of 4 to 6 stories around the edges of the study area, 4 stories along the two boulevards, as well as along an envisioned public space. The 4 stories, when we look at the existing zoning and in the existing development to the north and to the south. To the north is the low-scale commercial development that could potentially redevelop by right up to 45 feet. So it would create, there would be harmony between 4 stories and 45 feet. To the south, along the south side of Clarendon Boulevard, are townhouses. The maximum height for that zoning district is 45 feet as well. So staff felt that providing a similar height on the north side in the study area would help create kind of a harmonious balance between the two.
Just as a follow-up, because it's relevant to my thinking of the entire site as it is proposed. So the open space, the green space is on the south side of the building and at the corner. Is that prescriptive for the future site plan, or is that just a marker that there has to be one space there, and this may move around depending on the architecture or setting of the site plan application?
So the illustrative model models the envisioned open space on the southwest corner, as you noted. The study document recommendations speak to concentrating that public space or open space along Clarendon Boulevard, precisely at some point on Clarendon Boulevard. So it could be the southwest or it could be on the southeastern corner of the block. But one of the key considerations there was ensuring that open space is not going to be affected negatively by shadows. So keeping it on the south side of the study area was a key consideration. The provision of the open space also speaks to the existing recommendation in the courthouse sector plan addendum that also called for public space being provided on this block.
And the balance between hardscape versus a more naturalized space is, I guess, not to be specified at this level of planning, right?
So in the study document, there are recommendations related to natural resources that speak to kind of high-level targets for hardscape versus natural space.
But the balance then, so, okay, thank you.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah. So back to shadows for a minute. So I'm assuming if we do tapering, so if you've got a building that's a square like that, the shadow comes down like this, but if you do the tapering and step backs, that moves the shadow back, in effect, right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I wanted to check that. And so I spent some time this weekend, or this week, driving around counting floors on buildings and actually getting out and walking around. People think we don't listen, we do. I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to count, figure things out, just to sort of, mostly to see how it feels. So how it felt to me, one of the things I noticed, particularly walking actually around this plaza, is I'm walking around, it's feeling pretty good, and I step back and I think, oh my heavens, that building's a whole lot higher. But I never noticed it because of the step back. Is that a reasonable, that experience that I had? I assume that's sort of one of the things we kind of think about. So what it seemed to me is if you do the step backs and the tapering correctly, the effect on the street can be, it's a much lower building. Whereas in matter of fact, you get a lot more height without really affecting the feel on the street. You're nodding my head, your head. That means I'm kind of okay on my assumptions there. Okay, thank you. And that means I think when we will be getting to a vote at some point, it's part of the reason I'm more comfortable going a little bit higher, as long as I know we're going to do the tapering. And I know once they get over 4 stories, they got to come to us to do that, so we have control about how the design looks. So, all right, everybody seems to, I seem to be understanding it okay.
I'd love to, similar questions. You help us, give us some insight into how staff thinks about sculpting in, I mean, GLUB studies, again, they're so hard. You're basically just promulgating massing studies, right? But to what extent, when the staff recommendation is 12 stories, does that assume, a good bit of sculpting and tapering already? Because at some point, right, the assumption of sculpting and tapering starts to functionally cap, right, whether the amount of density, floor area ratio, et cetera, that could be achieved. So talk to us about how much you assume, how you assume, and what standards you use.
Yeah, absolutely. So as staff conducted its massing scenarios and developing different scenarios for the study area, one of the considerations is height transitions and tapering. Obviously, we knew that was a key piece of input and feedback from the community. One of the challenges, and you rightfully pointed it out, with a special GLUB study is there's not a site plan application for a specific development. It's intended to be high level and visionary and provide recommendations to help guide that application in the future. And so our study document, what we've included are a series of kind of high level recommendations and guidance related to tapering, related to step backs, related to the general placement of where the tallest height, if you will, where the tallest height ought to be located toward the center of the site. Providing that high-level guidance at this stage and setting the stage for that future site plan application and the future review of the site plan application to really specify when there's that, application, where are the most appropriate places to realize these high-level recommendations.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. So when we say, for example, that the density here of 220 units per acre, that assumes, not sort of the full box being built out at 12 stories.
So the 220 units per acre assumes some of this high-level tapering, but it's not necessarily a full box around the site.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Dorsey.
Well, thank you. And just to really go there, Madam Chair, the images that people saw, if they weren't able to absorb all of the text in the study document, the images that they see, the modeling images that they see, look at 4 to 6 story podium heights. They look at multiple step backs as you reach that 12-story recommendation. It pushes that height more towards the center. So everything that was outlined in the text in terms of plan goals is reflected in one illustrative way in the images, the modeling images that people see, but that's not exclusive of all of the ways in which the plan goals could be achieved, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thanks. All right, Mr. DeFerenti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as we work on height, I just wanted, we had some comments regarding site plan process, and when we've had special GLUP studies, if it doesn't seem to me that in every case we've then approved a site plan that builds all the way to that. It's sort of consistent with Mr. Dorsey's point that sculpting, that's one of the bullets in the slides, but then putting the word sculpting and the word tapering into a drawing and an actual building takes some time. So are you able to speak at all to the site plan process and the special GLUP process? I think one of our speakers said it's regularly been built to the maximum height. I don't believe that to be the case, but I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
So I don't have any specific examples that I can draw on at the moment. I'm not sure if other staff might be able to share. But one of the key considerations is that the guidance in the study document, it really informs that future site plan application. So if the study document identifies a maximum height, that really is hoping to set the maximum box, if you will. And I'll turn it over to.
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. I asked a theoretical and perhaps not clear question, so thank you for taking a stab in, Mr. Fustra.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning. For the record, Anthony Fusarelli with the Planning Division. And thank you for the question, Board Member DeFerenti. Just to provide a few specific recent examples in terms of how special GLUP studies and the guidance and documentation that the board has adopted has then gone on to inform and influence site plans to follow. Just two specific examples in the past few years in the Washington Kirkwood area, which I think was referenced earlier. The building height guidance that board approved or adopted with that study reached a maximum of 6 to 7 stories along the north side of Washington Boulevard. The board has since approved 2 site plans within the geographic limits of that area. Both of those site plans have reached a maximum of 7 stories and have been either recently completed or are currently under construction. To give one other example, the 11th and Vermont special GLUP study in North Ballston. Again, that site is currently going under construction. That site plan had been approved and amended several times, but again, consistent with the recommended height that was set forth in the special GLUP study. So I would say that, I think the process is working to the extent that the guidance adopted by this board helps set clear expectations for future applicants, for the community, and for staff in terms of what the maximum heights can be. It doesn't guarantee that the maximum will be proposed or approved in all instances, but those are a few examples that depict where they have.
Thank you. That's very helpful, even if my impression hadn't included this specifics, but it's still very helpful. I also want to, as we sort of move along, the one thing I will say with Madam Chair is there is slide 20 of the staff presentation leads me to concern with 16 stories as without the specificity of the additional step, that's I'm not quite at 16, and because it does seem as though a midpoint it would be towards the top. And if you think about the other buildings that Ms. Bird sent us, I want density in this particular place, as so many people told us transit-oriented development we've done so well, but I do think 16 stories seems slightly outside, at least my sense of what feels like fair expectations, even with a spine. So.
Thank you. Okay, well, the only other item to flesh out maybe before we start looking for a motion on the table, just any other questions about additional impacts? We definitely heard from some folks in the neighborhood concerned about traffic safety in particular. Again, many of those specifics, the circulation plans, parking, et cetera, will be addressed at a site plan process. I would love to take the opportunity to talk about the Courthouse Metro stop. I really appreciated Ms. O'Connell coming in about this, and I spent a lot of time thinking recently about Metro station elevators in context of Ballston. But the Courthouse Metro elevator is in our CIP with the idea that construction would start in fiscal 2026, which is pretty soon. So if staff could talk more about specifically what the plan for that elevator construction project is, where it is, and then any insights about maybe how it's funded, because I know Ms. O'Connell made the point that we are sitting on potentially some developer contributions for it.
Absolutely. So you rightfully noted in the current fiscal year 2023-2032 capital improvement plan is a project to replace the existing street level to Metro Station mezzanine elevator, which is located outside this building at 2200 Clarendon Boulevard. As part of that project, what that project is really intended to do is to remove the existing elevator, widen that elevator shaft to allow for space for 2 elevators, to create redundancy so that, if an elevator goes down, there's another elevator there. As you noted, that project identified in the CIP is intended to begin construction in fiscal year 2026 and is envisioned for completion in fiscal year 2029. Related to the funding for that project, there is already funding set aside, approximately $3.1 million of other previously approved funds that have been set aside and dedicated for this project, in addition to federal and state funding. And that other previously approved funding comes from developer contributions from site plans within the courthouse station area.
Really helpful. So at the 2200 Clarendon Boulevard location, I think that's really important. Ms. O'Connell, you may have mentioned it verbally, but I know you mentioned here wanting to make sure that we're not talking about the one that is interior to by the movie theater. I also learned in sort of surfacing some conversations that at one point there had been an idea on our MTP map that there might be a second Metro Station entrance that would be closer to this project. My understanding is that idea was about 15 years old at this point. Maybe it's been a little bit explored. Ridership at the station does not seem to support that. Just confirming there are no imminent plans to develop a second station entrance, even more proximate to this site. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, 2 things. One, I'll just follow up on a little bit more on the Metro entrance for Ms. O'Connell. The manager sent us a message. I think if you look on page 279 of the CIP, all of the spending is the money that's come in and what's been spent and where it goes. So I think all of your questions about the dollars are there in our capital improvement program. So we can talk about that maybe offline, or you can talk that with somebody, apparently on page 279 online. So if you can't find it, maybe we can help out with that. And then I had one other question. It may sound odd. Mr. Sarley, if I could ask you a question. You said in your statement, because one of the things we're talking about is impacts, the definition of walkability has changed. And I looked at the letter, I didn't see, could you talk about that a little bit? Because actually transportation, safety, parking, all of that kind of falls into walkability. How has the definition of walkability changed? I'm getting a little older, I feel things change to me that, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
Sure, so
Yeah.
Mr. Murphy can supply information, but at our planning commission meeting, we did discuss that acceptable distances from residence or, from place of work to a metro stop has expanded, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's correct. The discussion did begin to take a turn to that topic, discussing, as developed, the sector plan spoke to a quarter-mile radius, and those development and growth goals in the general land use plan speak to a quarter-mile radius. But what we were seeing perhaps is that folks from further than a quarter-mile radius are using those metro
People
stations.
are willing to walk farther, yeah. Particularly if we make the sidewalks wide and comfortable and we plant trees and things, that would help too. But I think people are a little more used. I was just kind of curious about that. Thank you. That was it. Walkable ability is actually pretty important.
Huge point, absolutely. Mr. DeFranti.
I'm ready with a motion, and if
I think we are.
If that works, this is not an easy one in my view. I indicated that 16 seemed slightly outside of my sense of the reasonable expectations under our planning systems and documents. I think it's also important to note that there will be other sites probably in this interval that will be redeveloped over the coming 10, 20, 30 years. I do think we have to address the problem of housing supply. Ultimately, for me, the staff presentation is persuasive, and 12 stories seems reasonable. Between 12 and, I think there is a plausible argument for 14. But I think that adding housing supply is important, and our planning documents ultimately, for me, leave some room here, and I think that the sustainability of this, as we continue to add supply, is important. And I think the staff presentation, the various pieces of the staff presentation are persuasive. So I would move the staff's recommendation. I guess I would say the difference for me between 12 and 14, we are still changing the spine.
Let's make sure we have a second for that.
Sure, but that is my motion.
Move the
Yes.
manager's recommendation. Mr. Carantonis, second.
second that.
Please.
Sure. So I guess I was starting to say, I don't see, our broader effort to address supply issues being ended as the difference between 12 and 14. I do think it's a little challenging because there's so much about community benefits that's at the site plan stage. But I think that the staff has been thorough, and I think that it's sort of fair in listening to our community, both those who've shared their thoughts, and we have received about 10 letters, I think, in support of additional density, read those, and also have engaged with neighbors in the nearby civic associations. I suppose it also is probably partly informed by having lived courthouse side and thinking a little bit slightly differently about the Clarendon side. But those are my reasons. I think the staff's work has been thorough, and I'd move the staff's recommendation.
All right.
Or I have moved the staff's recommendation.
Great. Further discussion about the motion. Mr. Carantonis, do you want to begin, and then I'll go to Mr. Dorsey?
Just briefly, Madam Chair, first of all, I'm very, very happy to see that gap in the corridor finally being filled, and it's especially refreshing to hear testimony from Mrs. Nolan and Mr. Swartz and Ms. Coffey, who live in the corridor, and Mr. Pidovitz, actually, who live in the corridor, who are one of, if we consider classes of citizens, of residents who typically engage with this kind of in conversations. They are the exception, and I welcome them here. They gave us an enormous insight in the quality of life that they expect, how they live, and they give us also insight on the pressing needs of housing supply, etc. This is really a very, very big crisis, and I'm absolutely not surprised. Under the current circumstances, that the cry for more density, for additional housing supply is getting stronger and stronger every day. Now, that said, these are buildings. This is an urban environment that will be with us for a very long time. And this is the viability of that, the ability to distribute density, to provide a great environment that is supported with assets, transportation, public facilities, public spaces, etc., includes taking into account urban design. And I do believe that staff has done a very thorough job in balancing a very, very difficult task here. So I do believe that 12 stories is a good compromise for this space, pending really an evolution of thinking on, what is the 21st century answer to the design requirements for an urban corridor, that are Los Angeles corridor. I do believe that distributed density is now way more current. This is a better way to think about the corridor. The bullseye concept, in my opinion, and I agree with those who see that it begins to expire historically. We have seen it already in the transition or a non-transition between Boston and Virginia Square, for example, or a little bit further down. So I do think that we have a completely different situation today. I also want to remind that according to the literature I read, the bullseye concept was also part of a political compromise based on the situation of the time, which wanted to use the bullseye concept as a containment of urban development. At some point, there were powerful political currents that wanted less than 5 stops in Arlington on the Ross-and-Boston corridor. They were talking about 4 stops, which would, make the bullseyes even smaller compared to the entire availability of urban territory. So for these reasons, and to me, the street and how the proportions work and the vistas and how the pedestrian perceives that is extremely important. Design matters as all other things. That said, I do believe that we can be more expansive, but for this, in terms of density, but for this building, I think that this block, I think that 12 stories represents a good and acceptable compromise for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just to give you a sense of what's informing what will be a substitute motion recommendation I'm about to make. I very much appreciate Ms. Chavez's testimony earlier outlining how this may be a little bit more complex than it seems to be at first blush. This is a fairly difficult approach to manage our planning principles, our future outlook, current circumstances, and everything else. So I do appreciate the work that has been done by staff with the GLUB study process and by the community through their engagement. And my baseline for looking at this particular site is a normative one, my own value statement, but it's not based on sort of what the existing circumstances are, but what would be best practices for a mixed use, medium density site with close proximity to transit. That's my baseline. And then also I project that forward, knowing that this building is going to be a vibrant building in 2050, probably have a useful life up until 2075. And with all of that as sort of background, I see that 12-story recommendation as a height limit is a comfortable choice by staff, given the mixed-use medium-density nature of this. It really looks to minimize impacts for the daily life of people who currently surround to the point where they're not appreciable impacts. We don't have draws on our infrastructure beyond what we've planned. It seems like the comfortable, safe choice. But for many reasons, I don't believe that we have the luxury of being comfortable. You know, I think Ms. Coffey's testimony made it very clear. I was, unaware until a few months ago that we had gotten into the point where the bidding wars that we see in home purchase opportunities has actually crept into the rental market. You know, I'd never known such a concept that you paid anything more than the price they advertise to you. And to know that that's not only changed, but that's the norm in certain hotspots, including the courthouse area, really leads me to not really want to be comfortable and to figure out how we can stretch, especially since we are looking at that future outlook. That said, as I think about 16 stories, that seems like a significant stretch beyond what we've really reasonably contemplated for an area such as this, and I'm uncomfortable going there without any broader planning. So colleagues, at the risk of offering something that at this point has not developed any kind of public constituency, I am going to put, at least for the purposes of conversation, a motion that the board adopt the resolution attachment 1 attached to board report number 44 dated September 12, 2022 to adopt the Courthouse West Special General Land Use Plan Study document as shown in attachment 2 with direction to the manager and staff to revise the plan study document to reflect a maximum of 14 stories rather than the staff recommendation of 12 stories.
All right. That has been moved and seconded. We have discussion on the substitute motion.
If I could just offer a brief
Please.
of why 14 and not 12 beyond what I just said. So it appears for me from my interpretation of the study document that really we're talking about incremental increases the closer we are to 12 above 12. And, at 14 stories, I see this as being an appropriate place where we're able to balance the whole idea of minimizing any negative impact versus creeping into that category where maybe we're stretching too far. I also really believe that this ability to consider additional height does succeed in accomplishing one of the key goals, at least alluded to in the plan, and that is to look at this site as a very interesting and novel gateway as you approach from the west to looking at Courthouse, to figuring out how, or actually either direction you're coming from, but to think about this site as a gateway site so that it really signifies a sense of place to Courthouse, which I think, if we're all being honest, it really maybe doesn't succeed in having to the extent that it possibly could, with some more interesting ways to deal with architecture. I do note also that the 2 stories in additional height and any additional density that would mean still have to be earned. And I think that's something that has not been, necessarily fully absorbed as part of the public conversation. The plan has clear goals that we believe can be achieved at a level of 12 stories maximum height. Anything above that is going to have to provide clearly articulable benefits beyond that can be articulated. So I am comfortable that this will not succeed in providing the developer an opportunity to just get more without making sure there's commensurate community value. And for those reasons, I suggest 14.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Ms. Garvey and then Mr. Franti.
And I'm happy to second and support the motion for all the reasons laid out. I'd like to just, I realize, I think maybe we ought to be using the term earned a whole lot more in our meetings, because people keep coming in, and I understand it's all about the developers and they just want money. Sure, there's the profit motive, but often what drives us is getting something for the community, more park space, more affordable housing. It's one of the ways that we can help build this community the way I think we all want it to be without having to raise taxes more than we already do. And it really can be a win-win when it happens correctly. And I also understand, I was thinking the 16 stories felt more like a little bit of a leap instead of a stretch, whereas the 14 felt like a bit of a stretch. And I will say my experience just kind of trying to walk around and think about heights and how it affected me moving around, and realizing that if there's some really good setback and good design, that it feels fine to me. I realize that's a very subjective statement, but in part because I couldn't even see the higher sections. And so I'm willing to make that stretch. I think I found Ms. Coffey's comments also very persuasive, both on the difficulty finding a place to live here, and actually her comments on how difficult it is for people to come in and speak to us, which I think we forget about, because it is, there are a lot of people that don't have the time and aren't inclined to do it, and I think this can feel a little bit intimidating to folks who haven't been here as much as most of us have. At any rate, I think it's looking forward 50, 75 years, long after I'll be gone. It feels like this is making a step and pushing us in the direction that we need to go, and keeping it a good community. I will finally say, and these will be my concluding comments as well, I don't need to say anything more, but a compliment to our staff, because the other kind of observing I've been doing lately is when I drive into the district, which I'm doing after the pandemic, when we're traveling a little more, is noticing in many places it's so monochromatic. I mean, the heights, excuse me, I don't know why my voice is just gravelly. I think it's a tree mold. The heights of it is so like and that it does look like a wall. And then I look back at Arlington, and it really is interesting and up and down. So I think we're succeeding in interesting, good design. And I'm pleased that we're doing that. So thank you. And with that, I'll conclude.
Thanks so much. Mr. DeFerranti.
Madam Chair, just a brief thought on, I'm trying to sort of, I think we are always balancing. We must serve our residents, and we also must think about our residents' needs in the 5, 10, 15, 20-year horizon. And I guess it's additive to Mr. Dorsey's thought. I think the reasoning is sound. I would say that my impression of the listening here is that I think I might add to the word comfortable in saying that this is a little pushing. It might not be, and listening to the community, that's why I would sort of add. I think you got a fair construct, and I do not believe in deferral, and I have been for some time in meetings with staff. I do think that it is very important. I might park in that parking lot sometime, but it should not exist. That should be density. So I think that's why I'm not quite there on the substitute, but I'm also not in a place to say that if it's earned, I don't want us to move forward. I think we have to. So I hope that's relevant to making my case and counting the votes that I might not have them.
Thanks so much. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey, I hear you, and I can't imagine a situation where we couldn't be responsive to what's happening in the market right now. I mean, this not only Ms. Coffey. I mean, we are hearing. I'm hearing from constituents absolutely horrible stories about, rent increases that are way above 10%. New contracts that jack up the price at plus 20, plus 25, even plus 30%. Social media is full of that. I think it's credible. In the region, we're talking about rental price gouging. There is even public talk about rent control. I mean, this is really a very deep crisis, and it's very, and I am recognizing that we cannot overlook that. We're de facto not overlooking that already by affording the 12-story additional density. So that said, is it part of your thinking that with the site plan that we have to expect here, that our expectation in the package of public benefits will be even more aggressive in terms of affordable housing, in terms of sustainability, in terms of the quality of the public space, et cetera? Does this go with that, and also better design for this building?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Karantonis. That does. I know staff has an analysis of what would be the expected range of community benefits that might be imputed from certain levels. I expect that baseline to be adjusted based on a proposal that is submitted and evaluated accordingly. So what that means in actuality, It's not for me to suggest. It could be in the form of housing. It could be in the form of design. It could be in the form of open space, or all of the above. I just don't know. But my expectation is that the guidance to staff in let's say pursuing 14 as a limit would be to establish what might be that baseline, if you will, from 12, and to figure out the incremental increase in what the community should deserve as appropriate benefits.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to share some thoughts of my own, and like Ms. Garvey, I'll make some comments and have them be my concluding ones as well. So there are a couple of things that are salient to me. A big one is one that Ms. Garvey was actually just talking about, which is how the additional stories are experienced from the ground plane, which is why I asked Mr. Murphy a number of questions about sort of the expectations regarding tapering. The other thing that matters a lot to me, absent really, I think you can see how much we're grasping for having the guidance that a relatively fresh sector plan might give us, right? And absent that, we're looking for indications of what fits into this planning context, what pushes the envelope a little bit, because I very much associate myself with Mr. Dorsey's desire, given the housing crisis in which we find ourselves, but what relates to expectations in the existing environment, as well as bridging to a 50-year hence environment. And so for me, we're not just setting precedent, we have an opportunity to follow it. And I think really looking at and thinking about some of the precedential buildings, images, recent approvals has been very helpful for me. I think, for example, about one of the projects that we voted for relatively early in our tenure, Mr. Dorsey and I, that 2000 Clarendon site, right, which is a great example of 14 stories. And really thought a lot about how that would fit in close to a metro station, but consistent with the spine, again, along the Orange Line corridor. And I do believe that 14 stories is appropriate here. It would be my expectation that those additional stories would be spent, so to speak, in establishing more of that tapering. Certainly balancing more of that building, focusing the main corridor and stepping down to the building. I actually think, and we talk about this quite often, that oftentimes it is additional height that allows us to both achieve a sculpted building and, not for nothing, potentially more open space, right? And so that's meaningful here, because I do think, based on what we've heard from community members, there is a strong desire for thinking about that in context of a site plan. So I am, for the reasons I think Mr. Dorsey described, as well as those design pieces, supportive of that idea of 14 stories, at least, again, the GLUP study, always about setting the box, right, with very high expectations for the community benefits that would be delivered within it, as well as the potential for sculpting that those additional 2 stories might enable. Just in conclusion, too, I don't want to be naive in how much having clear and modernized expectations about height and density and our philosophy about that along the corridor will alleviate some of the frustrations experienced by, I would say, especially our civic leaders, right? Those who are trying to manage civic associations. In some ways, they are, and Ms. Chavez, especially in her comments, they are doing a version of what we are doing, right? Which is trying to find consensus among different points of view. And I know, I think her testimony really emphasized that a lot of those questions and efforts to seek consensus, what is lacking are the types of insights that will only come with a site plan, or maybe with a multi-year, really fulsome sector plan. So I don't mean to suggest simply if we modernize our expectations about our height and density philosophy, all will be resolved. Nevertheless, I think for reasons the Planning Commission surfaced really well, Ms. Alexander surfaced in her comments, that is really needed. And so just want to underscore my support for what sounds like is going to be some thinking from our staff coming as part of the 5-year comprehensive plan review to really engage in that conversation as a community. I, like Mr. Carantonis, really appreciated the perspective of renters in particular, which is one in my tenure has often been lacking. I think it is very helpful, and I hope, for those who asked us questions, some of which were in earnest about, sort of to whom is the board listening. I think it's really important to know that there are a variety of opinions among neighbors. I'll just note, I think sometimes these expressions about, well, this is just for developers, maybe are expressions of the fact that ultimately some of us are uncomfortable with the fact that the capitalist system in which we live makes housing, which should be a human right, contingent on the private market. Nevertheless, as much as we might want to blue sky our way out of that into a system more of social housing, we do live in that system. And unless you live in a committed affordable unit, every single one of us lives in a home that somebody made money making. And so I hope that we as a community, and this harkens to some of the conversations we were having this morning, can really have these questions and conversations in context of neighbors having different perspectives, people who live in different types of housing having different perspectives, people who have different aspirations for the community having different perspectives, not as a matter of the first order of somebody who might be making money. I think that these are really important conversations that we can have among ourselves all, with intentions solely of the betterment of our collective community. All right, with that, Mr. DeFerenti, any closing comments?
It's a procedural question.
Please.
Do we vote first on the substitute and then on final passage?
Got it, exactly.
I may want to, after the vote on the substitute, I may want to speak very briefly.
Sure. Okay, so Mr. Dorsey's motion, a substitute which would allow 14 stories as we adopt the special GLUP study documents, is on the table. All those in favor of the substitute, please say aye. Aye. Yes, substitute. Okay. All those opposed, please say no.
Nay. No.
Okay, so that passes 3-2 and becomes the main motion. Mr. Dorsey, do we need to take a second vote on the main motion now? Yep. We do. Okay, so that now becomes the main motion. Before we vote on that main motion, which now, 14 stories, I will open the floor for comments. Mr. DeFerenti.
I'll be brief. It was what led me on the community on the substitute was community engagement in this particular case amidst a less than bright line clear planning environment. But if the choice is between deferral or less than 12 stories, I've heard the comments on earning the additional 2 stories, and I can't ignore the supply problem. As recently as 2 different civic association meetings and conversations this week, folks said they really love transit-oriented development. Well, if you love transit-oriented development, I don't think it is a tenable thing to say 6 stories on this site. But I did very much, I advocated for 12 because I thought it was consistent with listening to community engagement. I will be voting yes on the overall motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerenti. Appreciate those comments. Mr. Karantonis.
I was the second one who thought that 14 is still a little bit too much. There is definitely, I mean, this, of course, the additional stories are still inside the philosophy and the idea and the broader expectation of delivering density where it belongs, where the assets are, where the people are, and where problems can be solved. Among them, also the housing problem. While this is not the silver bullet here, it is additional supply. And I remember always that even as a jurisdiction and regionally, we committed as the COG to commit housing resources where the activity centers is and the opportunity centers as well. Going up to 14 stories just adds an additional layer of responsibility, not only the public outreach, and I know that, and I'm speaking now to Mr. Knoll, as a future applicant here, to make a significant effort in producing a great building, a building that works with the community, where community can see the benefits. Can see the improvement of the public realm, of the quality of life around this building. That adds to the urban feeling of Clarendon and redefines it for the time where we are living. And in addition, delivers on critical public benefits. And I would start with housing. And I agree with Ms. Crystal on the size and quality of the public space. Mm-hmm. And since you are, Mr. Nolan, represent a company that is one of the first who built a LEED Platinum building here, if I remember correctly. So I'm happy that you will be on the other side of the table when we will have to discuss a very high level of lead. And I have high expectations that this will be possible with this additional two stories. So in that sense, I will vote for the motion. It's not enough outside my expectations to trigger a negative vote.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Dorsey, concluding comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate Mr. Karantonis and Mr. DeFerranti for signaling support of something that ultimately is perhaps a little bit beyond their comfort zone. I do not take that lightly. And I will just note that this attempt to try and sort of think about this while adhering to our principles, while also managing to try and be as responsive as we can to near-term and future needs is what I hope will typify the SPRC process, the level of flexibility and openness to thinking about new things. Just as this particular action that it seems the board is poised to take today differs from the staff recommendation as well as the initial proposal for this GLUP study and creates sort of a new approach or a new limit. I hope that same spirit of looking at this specifically guides the SPRC process. While I know many people who have followed processes in the past have walked away with a perception that the developers always get their way. One, this proceeding is an example of how that does not happen and should also provide confidence that during the SPRC, it need not happen there again. Whether they propose something at 14 stories or something else, I hope the excellent studies, guiding principles, and vision as articulated is the sole basis for how their project is determined to be in conformance with what we want as a county. So I look forward to what is to come, and that's it.
Thanks so much. I believe that we are ready for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much to the Planning Commission and particularly to our staff, Mr. Murphy in specific, for the very good work here. All right, Ms. Jacobs, do we have any other items to come before the board today?
We do not.
All right, with that, we are going to adjourn until Tuesday the 20th at 3 p.m. See everyone there.